The door at the end of the corridor was not on Ethan Cole's map, and in Crimson Vale Palace, doors that did not appear on a map were usually the kind that got men buried without names. He stood beneath a row of flickering red emergency lights with a tool bag in one hand and a cracked glass tablet in the other, watching the palace blueprint shiver across the screen like it was afraid to tell him the truth. 3 minutes ago, the tablet had shown a simple maintenance route. North Service Hall, left at the old fountain, repair junction box C17, get paid, leave before sunrise. Now the entire left wing had rearranged itself into lines that should not connect, walls bending into angles that made his eyes ache if he stared too long. The signal marker blinked 12 feet ahead of him, directly in front of a silver door that had not existed when he walked this hallway the first time. Ethan swallowed and looked back the way he had come. The corridor behind him stretched into darkness, longer than it should have been, its black marble floor reflecting the red lights like a river of slow-moving blood. He hated that comparison the instant it entered his mind. Working night contracts in vampire territory had taught him not to romanticize anything in this place. Marble was marble. Light was light. A door was just a door, unless the vampires had spent 2,000 years writing laws about who was allowed to open it. His radio clicked in his ear, then spat static. "Control, this is Cole," he said, keeping his voice low because the palace seemed designed to punish volume. "The route is wrong. I'm outside an unmarked door near the north wing." "Repeat, unmarked door. Can you confirm junction box C17 is behind this thing?" Static answered him, thin and cold. Ethan shifted his tool bag higher on his shoulder and checked the time glowing on his wrist display. 2:13 a.m. In exactly 47 minutes, the Crimson Vale Court would begin the masked succession, the ceremony every human contractor had been warned to avoid as if it were an active war zone. He had signed 3 separate forms confirming he understood that certain wings of the palace would become restricted after midnight. He had also signed a 4th form acknowledging that accidental trespass did not protect him from local law, royal law, religious law, blood law, mirror law, witness law, or any category of punishment the vampire court considered traditional. He had laughed at that part when the human liaison handed him the contract. The liaison had not laughed back. "Fix the lights, keep your eyes down, don't touch anything silver, and don't answer if someone calls your name from behind a closed door," she had told him. Ethan had asked whether that last part was a joke. She had said, "Not in this palace." Now the silver door in front of him breathed out a line of pale mist from the scene beneath it, and somewhere on the other side, a woman whispered, "Please, not the mask again." Ethan went completely still. The words were soft enough that he might have imagined them, but the fear beneath them was real. It reached through the door and hooked under his ribs. He knew that tone, not from vampire courts or ancient rituals or whatever nightmare politics happened under these frozen ceilings. He knew it from hospital waiting rooms, from court hallways, from the voice of his younger sister years ago when nobody powerful believed her until Ethan stood up and made himself impossible to ignore. That choice had cost him his career back in Chicago. One honest statement, one truth told under fluorescent lights, and every theater that used to hire him suddenly forgot his number. Since then, Ethan Cole had become very good at fixing other people's darkness without asking why the lights had gone out. He was 31 years old, 5'11" in work boots, brown hair overdue for a cut, gray-blue eyes that made him look more tired than brave, and absolutely no interest in becoming a story whispered by immortals over candlelight. He should have turned around. He should have found a guard. He should have remembered that human kindness was not legal currency in a vampire palace. Instead, the lights above him flickered harder, and the whisper came again, smaller this time. No, something inside the door struck the floor with a metallic crack. Ethan's grip tightened around the handle of his tool bag. "Control," he said again, though he already knew the radio was dead. "I may have an injured person behind an unmarked door. I'm entering to assess." The static hissed like disapproval. He almost smiled despite the cold sweat gathering at the back of his neck. "Yeah," he muttered, "I know. Terrible idea." The door had no handle, only a circular plate of polished silver set at chest height. Its surface reflected him wrong. In the reflection, Ethan looked pale and stretched, his face half hidden by shadow, as if the palace were trying to show him the version of himself that would exist after he crossed the threshold. Along the rim of the plate, letters in a language older than English curved like frozen flame. He could not read them, but his tablet could. It scanned the markings, hesitated, and produced a translation in blocky white text. Sanctum of the veiled heir. Authorized blood only. Witness prohibited. Ethan stared at the final two words. Witness prohibited. That was not a warning meant for electricians. That was the kind of phrase they carved into places where history had gone wrong before. The smart part of his brain screamed at him to walk away. The human part heard another sound from inside. A sharp inhale cut off too quickly, like someone had trained herself not to cry out. He pressed his gloved palm against the silver plate. For 1 second, nothing happened. Then the metal warmed under his hand, not with heat, but with recognition. The red lights overhead snapped off. The whole corridor plunged into darkness. Ethan had just enough time to whisper, "Oh, that's bad," before a bell rang somewhere deep inside the palace. One slow note that rolled through the walls and vanished into the stone. The silver door unlocked. Not opened. Unlocked. As if it had been waiting for someone foolish enough to care. A thin line of white light split the darkness. Ethan stepped through it. The room beyond was enormous, impossible, and silent in a way that felt staged for a crime. 12 black mirrors stood in a circle beneath a vaulted ceiling painted with stars that moved like living things. Veils of dark silk hung from chains overhead, stirring although there was no wind. On the marble floor lay a silver mask, cracked clean down the middle, its elegant mouth frozen in an expression of perfect obedience. And beyond it, standing with one hand braced against a mirror and the other pressed to her cheek, was Princess Elara. Ethan knew her from palace posters, treaty broadcasts, ceremonial portraits, and every warning packet issued to human staff. In all of them, she wore the mourning mask. In all of them, she looked distant, untouchable, almost unreal. But now the mask was on the floor, and the woman behind it turned toward him with wide crimson eyes, silver hair falling loose around a face no outsider was ever supposed to see. On her left cheek, beneath the place the mask had hidden, a glowing crimson mark burned in the shape of a crown. It was beautiful. It was terrifying. It was proof of something no one in this palace wanted revealed. Ethan forgot every rule except the oldest one humans had. When someone is hurt, you ask if they can stand. "Are you injured?" he said. The princess did not answer. Her gaze moved from his face to the open door behind him, then to the broken mask at her feet. The blood drained from her expression so completely that for one absurd second, Ethan thought vampires could go pale. In the nearest black mirror, a red eye opened. Then another. Then all 12 mirrors awakened at once, filling with the reflected faces of nobles gathered somewhere far below, hundreds of immortal witnesses turning in perfect silence toward the forbidden room. A voice older than the palace itself spoke from the glass. First witness recognized. Princess Elara looked at Ethan as if he had not entered a room, but started a war. "Human," she whispered, and the fear in her voice was worse than anger. "You should not have seen me." Ethan Cole had learned a long time ago that the most dangerous rooms were not always the ones with locked doors. Sometimes they were offices with glass walls and smiling people in expensive suits. Sometimes they were conference rooms where everyone knew the truth but waited for the lowest-ranking person to say it first. Sometimes they were quiet places where a man had to decide whether keeping his job was worth pretending he had not seen someone being crushed by a system too large to fight. That was why, even with 12 black mirrors staring at him and a vampire princess whispering that he should never have seen her, the first thought in Ethan's mind was not about ancient law or royal punishment. It was the memory of a theater in downtown Chicago, the smell of dust on velvet seats, the low hum of a lighting board under his hands, and a young stage assistant named Rachel trying not to cry in the loading dock because a director with money and influence had blamed her for a rigging failure she did not cause. Back then, Ethan had been somebody, or at least he had been close enough to somebody to believe his name could carry weight. He was the lead lighting engineer for one of the most respected performance venues in the city, the kind of job people in his field spent years chasing. He knew how to make a bare stage look like sunrise, how to turn a single actor in a pool of warm light into the center of the universe, how to hide cables, angles, machinery, and all the practical ugliness that made wonder possible. He was good at it. Not famous, not rich, not powerful, but good. He had a union card, a steady schedule, health insurance that did not make him laugh bitterly, and an apartment near the lake where the radiator clanked all winter, but the view almost made up for it. Then one night, a safety clamp failed above the main stage during rehearsal. Nobody was seriously hurt, but the theater needed someone to blame before donors heard the words negligence and inspection in the same sentence. Rachel was 22, new, nervous, and easy to sacrifice. Ethan had checked the maintenance logs himself. He knew the clamp had been reported twice. He knew management had delayed the replacement because opening weekend mattered more than a line item on a safety sheet. The smart move would have been silence. Everyone told him that without saying it. His supervisor put a hand on his shoulder and reminded him that jobs like theirs did not survive public embarrassment. A board member used the phrase complicated situation. Even Rachel, face pale under the loading dock lights, told him not to ruin himself over her. Ethan still walked into the investigation meeting and told the truth. By the end of the month, Rachel was cleared, the theater paid a fine, and Ethan's calendar emptied like a glass tipped over a sink. No one accused him directly. They did not have to. Calls stopped coming. Friends became polite. Colleagues said they admired him, then hired someone else. The city that had once seemed full of open doors became a grid of locked ones. He took temporary work. Concert halls, wedding venues, convention centers. He fixed light bars at high school auditoriums and rewired emergency signs in strip malls outside Milwaukee. He sold his good camera, then his better tools, then finally the apartment with the lake view. By the time interspecies contracting opened new routes into neutral territories, Ethan was desperate enough to sign on with Helix Civil Systems, a company that specialized in sending ordinary American workers into places where ordinary American workers were not especially wanted, but were still cheaper than trained diplomatic engineers. That was how a man from Chicago ended up replacing antique electrical relays under vampire embassies, calibrating human-compatible oxygen sensors in demon consulates, and repairing ceremonial lighting in buildings where the walls sometimes whispered in languages his tablet refused to translate. He was not brave in the way soldiers were brave. He did not run toward danger because he enjoyed the rush or because he believed the universe owed him a heroic moment. He ran toward problems because leaving them alone made him feel like he was becoming the kind of man who had once looked away while Rachel stood in the dock with her life collapsing around her. There was a difference, he had learned, between having courage and having a conscience that would not shut up. Most nights, that conscience was an inconvenience. In Crimson Vale Palace, it might become a death sentence. He had arrived at the palace 6 hours earlier through the service gate on the western wall, wearing a gray work jacket with reflective strips, carrying a tool bag heavy enough to pull one shoulder lower than the other, and trying very hard not to look impressed. That last part had failed immediately. The palace rose out of the Massachusetts coastline like a black cathedral that had decided the ocean was beneath it. It stood on a cliff north of Salem, hidden from most human maps by treaties, money, and old magic. Its towers sharpened against the night sky, its windows glowing red and white like watchful eyes. Ethan had driven there in a rented service van with a cracked cup holder, a half-empty thermos of coffee, and a folder full of warnings printed in 3 languages. Human contractors were permitted in assigned work zones only. Human contractors were not permitted to photograph royal architecture. Human contractors were not permitted to accept gifts, invitations, blood offerings, memory coins, moon wine, sealed letters, or personal requests from members of the court. Human contractors were not to address masked royalty unless spoken to first. Human contractors were to avoid all mirrors larger than 24 inches after midnight. Ethan had read that last rule twice, then decided he did not get paid enough to ask why. At the service entrance, a vampire guard in black armor looked at his badge for nearly a full minute without blinking. Ethan stood still, hands visible, breath fogging faintly in the cold. The guard was taller than him by several inches, perfect in that unsettling way vampires often were, as if somebody had carved him out of marble and taught them marble disappointment. "You are the light repairman," the guard said. "Technician," Ethan answered before he could stop himself. The guard's eyes lowered to the tool bag. "You repair lights." Ethan nodded. "Technician is fine." That was Ethan's place in the hierarchy of the night, and he understood it completely. To the Crimson Vale Court, he was not a guest. He was not a witness. He was not a man with a history or opinions or a life that had once been larger than invoices and repair tickets. He was a pair of hands attached to a temporary badge. Useful, breakable, forgettable. He had been escorted through servant corridors where no nobles walked, past kitchens that smelled of cinnamon, iron, and winter flowers, past silent human staff who kept their eyes down with the discipline of people who had learned not to be noticed. A housekeeper from Baltimore slipped him a warning while pretending to adjust a linen cart. "Do your job and leave before the bells," she murmured. "Which bells?" Ethan asked. She glanced toward a dark mirror at the end of the hall. "Any bells." The repair order itself looked simple enough. Several ceremonial light arrays in the north wing had begun flickering before the succession ritual. The palace had its own vampire engineers, but the failing components were human-made, installed during a treaty renovation in the 1990s, and apparently no one immortal wanted to read a 70-page manual about low-voltage control systems. Ethan could read it. Ethan could fix it. Ethan could keep his head down, collect the hazard bonus, and be back in his rented hotel room before dawn. That had been the plan. It was a good plan. It was the kind of plan built by a man who had stopped expecting life to reward good intentions. Yet as the hours passed, the palace seemed to test him. Corridors changed temperature without reason. Portraits turned their faces away when his flashlight touched them. Once, while kneeling beside a junction panel, Ethan heard applause coming from an empty ballroom, soft and distant, like an audience clapping for a performance that had ended centuries ago. He ignored it. He was good at ignoring strange things when strange things were not asking for help. Then the emergency route shifted. The tablet map broke. The silver door appeared. And behind it, a woman whispered as if she had already learned that nobody was coming. That was the part Ethan could never survive. Not the palace. Not the laws. Not the ancient court waiting behind mirrors. The part that always undid him was the small sound someone made when they were trying to be strong alone. Now, standing inside the forbidden chamber with Princess Elara staring at him, as if he had become the final piece in some terrible ritual, Ethan understood too late that his mistake had not been opening the door. His mistake had been exactly the same one that had cost him everything years before. He had heard pain where he was supposed to hear nothing, and he had answered. The voice from the mirror did not echo like sound. It arrived inside the room as a pressure, as if the palace itself had decided to speak through stone, glass, and blood memory. First witness recognized. Ethan felt the words settle over his skin colder than the air. Around him, the 12 black mirrors brightened from within, their surfaces no longer reflecting the chamber, but opening onto another place far below, a vast hall crowded with pale faces, crimson eyes, velvet robes, silver crowns, and expressions that shifted from ritual boredom to absolute, paralyzed disbelief. The vampires were not watching through technology. Ethan understood that at once, even before fear gave him the shape of the thought. This was older than cameras, older than electricity. The mirrors were part of the court itself, a living system of witness and record, and because he had opened the wrong door at the wrong moment, hundreds of nobles had just seen him standing inside the sanctum of the veiled heir with Princess Elara unmasked before him. Nobody moved in the glass. Not a single immortal in that distant hall even appeared to breathe. Then, somewhere beyond the mirrors, a bell rang a second time. Princess Elara closed her eyes as if that sound hurt worse than anything else in the room. When she opened them again, the fear had vanished behind something colder, sharper, and royal enough to remind Ethan that this woman was not only trapped inside the law. She had been raised by it, sharpened by it, and probably expected to die beneath it if the court demanded the shape of her life. "Do not speak," she said. Her voice was quiet, but the command carried weight. "Do not apologize. Do not explain. Every word you say while the mirrors are awake becomes part of the record." Ethan's mouth closed. It was the smartest thing he had done all night. The broken silver mask lay between them on the marble floor, one half facing upward, one half tilted toward the nearest mirror, and in its polished surface Ethan saw the crimson mark glowing on Elara's cheek. It was not a scar. It was not a wound. It moved faintly under her. Skin like banked fire beneath glass, forming the outline of a crown made from 7 thin points. Every time the mark pulsed, the mirrors brightened. Every time the mirrors brightened, the faces in the distant hall looked more afraid. That was when Ethan realized the forbidden thing he had seen was not her face. It was proof. The palace had been built to hide proof. Crimson Vale Palace was not merely a royal residence on a cliff above the Atlantic. It was a courthouse, a shrine, a memory vault, and a political machine disguised as Gothic beauty. Its towers were not decorative. They marked the boundaries of legal chambers older than the United States by more than 1,000 years. Its mirrors were not ornaments. They were the eyes of the court, forged from volcanic glass and lunar silver, bound to witness any event that threatened the royal line. Its masks were not symbols of modesty or elegance. They were contracts worn against the skin. Ethan had heard fragments of this during his contractor briefing, though at the time the information had sounded like overdramatic cultural trivia designed to scare human electricians into staying inside approved corridors. The Crimson Vale Court descended from one of the old Atlantic vampire houses, a royal clan that claimed it had governed the hidden night territories of North America long before human ships crossed the ocean. To humans, they were ambassadors, investors, patrons of historic preservation, and unervingly wealthy donors to universities no one could afford. To other supernatural courts, they were lawkeepers. They did not rule by numbers. They ruled by memory. Every promise made in the palace could be preserved. Every betrayal could be replayed. Every claim of blood, title, debt, or marriage could be judged before mirrors that did not forget. That was why the succession ceremony mattered. The court was not gathering tonight to celebrate Princess Elara. They were gathering to verify whether she would be allowed to become something more dangerous than a princess. The masked succession was supposed to be clean, controlled, ceremonial. Elara would enter the Great Hall wearing the mourning mask, kneel before Queen Marceline Vere, recite the old vows, and either be accepted as heir under the court's supervision or quietly placed under the regency of Lord Adrian Vale until the court determined she was stable enough to rule. The word stable had appeared in several palace notices Ethan had passed during the evening. He had not understood how ugly it was until now. It was the sort of polite word powerful people used when they wanted to put a lock on someone and call it protection. The mourning mask was the center of that lock. According to the official history, the mask had been created 3 centuries earlier after a succession crisis nearly fractured the Crimson Vale bloodline. A young heir had revealed her face before the proper rite, causing half the court to swear loyalty based on beauty, sympathy, rumor, and panic rather than blood law. The court had nearly split in two. To prevent that kind of chaos from returning, the veiled heir law was written into the palace itself. Until the night of succession, the face of the heir would belong not to the public, not to rivals, not to suitors, and not even fully to the heir herself. It would be hidden behind silver, witnessed only by selected blood relatives and approved ritual attendants. The court called this dignity. The law called it preservation. Ethan, standing a few feet from a woman whose hands were trembling with the effort not to reach for the broken mask, thought it looked a lot like a cage. But the law had a second layer. The part human contractors were never told because no one expected them to survive close enough to trigger it. If an outsider saw the veiled heir without the mask before succession, the palace mirrors would judge the nature of the witness. If the witness had forced entry with harmful intent, the court could erase the record of the event and remove the witness from the proceedings. If the witness had been invited, seduced, bribed, or politically arranged, the heir could be charged with dishonor, manipulation, or conspiracy. But if the witness entered by accident and saw not only the face but the true blood mark of succession, then an ancient clause awakened, one written when kingdoms were still, arranged around omens, and the supernatural world believed fate could speak through mistakes. The outsider became first witness. Not husband, not owner, not savior. Witness, a living legal anchor between the hidden truth and the public court. Until the mirrors determined whether the sighting exposed scandal or revealed legitimacy, the first witness could not be dismissed, silenced, moved beyond the heir's presence, or put under private control. He had to stand close enough to the heir for the law to test whether the truth remained stable when seen by someone with no blood interest in the throne. If the court accepted him, his testimony could protect Elara. If the court condemned him, his testimony could destroy her. And if the nobles decided the old marriage clause served them better than the truth, they could demand a union hearing before sunrise. Ethan knew none of this yet in full, but he felt the shape of it forming around him from the way the room reacted. The open door behind him sealed itself with a sound like ice closing over a lake. The black mirrors widened their view of the great hall, where vampires in ceremonial robes began to rise from their seats. In the center of that hall, on a throne carved from white stone and dark crystal, Queen Marceline Vere stood. Even through the mirror, her presence struck the chamber like a change in weather. She was tall, pale, and still, with silver-black hair braided beneath a crown of thin red metal. Her eyes fixed first on Elara, then on Ethan, then on the broken mask. Something crossed her face too quickly for Ethan to name. Shock, perhaps, or recognition, or the grief of a mother realizing a door she had ordered locked had finally opened from the inside. Beside the throne, Lord Adrian Vale rose more slowly. He was handsome in the way a knife could be handsome, all clean lines, formal restraint, and polished control. His dark coat was embroidered with silver thread in the shape of thorn vines, and unlike the others, he did not look confused. He looked interrupted. That single detail tightened the air in Ethan's lungs. Adrian's gaze moved to the crimson crown mark on Elara's cheek, and for 1 second, hatred broke through his perfect courtly mask. Then it was gone, replaced by concern so smooth it felt rehearsed. "Seal the sanctum," Adrian said, his voice traveling through the mirrors with ceremonial calm. "The princess has been compromised." Elara's chin lifted. "I have not been compromised." The mirrors trembled when she spoke, as if the palace had waited years to hear her say those words without permission. Adrian inclined his head, a gesture of respect shaped like a chain. "Your Highness, an unvetted human stands inside your private chamber during the hour before succession. Your mask is broken. Your mark is exposed. The court has seen enough to require intervention." The word intervention moved through the nobles like a familiar weapon being drawn from velvet. Ethan saw several of them relax at the sound of it. Not because the situation was safer, but because someone had given them a script. That was how courts survived terror. They turned it into procedure. A robed elder near the front of the hall lifted both hands and began reciting in a language Ethan's translator struggled to catch. His tablet, still clutched uselessly in his hand, flashed partial phrases across the cracked screen. "Veiled heir. Unauthorized sight. Mirror record. Witness proximity. Marriage demand admissible upon dawn review." Ethan looked at the words and felt the floor tilt beneath him. Marriage demand. Elara saw his expression and gave the smallest shake of her head, a warning not to react where they could see. But the nobles had already begun whispering. The phrase spread across the great hall, first as alarm, then calculation. Some faces showed outrage. Others showed curiosity. A few showed satisfaction. To them, Ethan was not Ethan Cole from Chicago, a failed lighting engineer with overdue bills and a bad habit of telling the truth. He was an unexpected legal instrument, dropped by accident into the most delicate political ceremony of their century. He could be used to delay Elara's succession. He could be used to question her judgment. He could be used to force a marriage hearing and bind her future to scandal before she ever touched the crown. The small act that had brought him here, opening a door because someone sounded afraid, had become the key in a lock the entire court had been waiting to turn. The third bell rang. This time, the sound came from every mirror at once. The black glass turned red at the edges, and the ancient voice returned, deeper now, more certain. "Forbidden sight recorded. Blood mark revealed. Witness and heir are bound to court review until dawn." A thin line of crimson light appeared on the floor between Ethan and Elara, then curved around them both in a perfect circle. It did not burn. It did not threaten. It simply existed, quiet and absolute, like a law made visible. Ethan looked at Elara. She looked back at him with eyes bright enough to make the darkness seem fragile. In that moment, he understood the first rule of the world he had stepped into. Vampire law did not need to chase you. It waited until you crossed the line, then moved the whole palace around you. The circle of crimson light held Ethan and Elara in the center of the forbidden chamber while the court watched from every mirror, and for several seconds nobody did anything because the old law had trapped them all in a space between ceremony and disaster. Ethan could hear his own breathing. He could hear the faint electric buzz from the broken junction hidden somewhere behind the wall, still sparking in irregular pulses, The original reason he had been sent into this wing before the palace decided to rewrite his route. He could also hear the soft, controlled sound of Elara trying to steady herself. She stood as straight as any royal portrait, silver hair loose over her shoulders, the glowing crown mark on her cheek pulsing beneath the cold mirror light. But her fingers had curled so tightly around the edge of a black mirror that the glass beneath her hand had begun to frost. The sight unsettled him more than the watching nobles. The court looked angry, afraid, insulted, curious. All the reactions of people who cared about law before they cared about the person caught inside it. Elara looked like someone watching an old nightmare prove itself true. Lord Adrian Vale's voice slid through the mirror again, calm enough to make the room colder. Princess, remain still. Do not approach the human. Do not allow him to approach you. The court will dispatch proper attendants to restore the mask and secure the record. Elara's eyes flicked to the broken silver mask on the floor. No, the word was almost too quiet, but the mirrors carried it to the hall. A ripple passed through the vampires below. Adrian did not raise his voice. He did not need to. Your Highness, the mask must be restored before the succession bell completes its fourth call. If the mark remains exposed under open witness, the court will be forced to consider that the reveal was intentional. The change in Elara was small, but Ethan saw it because he was only a few feet away. Her shoulders tightened. Not in pride. In fear. The mask was not only a symbol. It was something worse, something that could be put back on her against her will and then described as duty. Ethan looked at the two halves of silver lying between them. They were beautiful in the same way handcuffs could be beautiful if somebody carved prayers into them. Fine filigree traced the edges. Tiny red stones glimmered where the brow should have rested. Along the inside surface, there were delicate hooks and pale threads of old enchantment that stirred like roots searching for soil. He had repaired enough old theater equipment to recognize a device designed to close, lock, and stay locked. Ethan Cole, Queen Marceline said from the central mirror. Her voice was not loud, but every other whisper in the hall died beneath it. You will step away from my daughter. Ethan turned his head toward the queen, careful not to move his feet outside the crimson circle because the law had not explained what would happen if he did. Your Majesty, I am not trying to get closer to her. You are already closer than any unbound outsider has been permitted to stand. Then I am telling you, from this very close and extremely unwanted position, something is wrong with that mask. A soft hiss of offense moved through the court. Ethan felt it before he understood it, a collective rejection of his right to have an opinion. He was a human technician. He fixed wires. He did not diagnose royal artifacts in front of immortal nobility. Adrian's expression hardened by a fraction. The human is confused by fear. His words should not be entered as interpretation. I am not interpreting, Ethan said, then immediately regretted speaking again. The mirrors brightened, recording him. But the words were out, and once Ethan had crossed a line for the sake of the truth, he had never been good at crawling backward. I saw the inside of it. That is not ceremonial padding. That is a locking mechanism. And those threads are moving. Elara looked at him then, really looked at him, and the force of her attention nearly made him forget the court. You can see them? Ethan glanced down at the mask. The pale threads quivered along the cracked interior, reaching faintly toward her voice. Yes. In the mirrors, several nobles stood. An older vampire in white robes whispered something. Ethan's tablet translated badly as unlicensed perception. Adrian's hand closed around the top of his silver cane. Enough. The mask responds to royal blood. That is its purpose. Its purpose seems very interested in crawling back onto her face by itself. This time the silence was deeper. Ethan knew he had said too much, but he also saw Elara's eyes lower toward the mask, and for a heartbeat, the princess looked less like a terrifying immortal heir and more like a woman standing inches from a locked door she had escaped once and might never escape again. The threads inside the mask stretched another inch across the marble. Elara took one step back. The crimson circle flared. Every mirror rang softly, a warning note. The ancient voice spoke again. Witness proximity required. Ethan understood the law only at the moment it tightened. Elara could not move away from him. He could not move away from her. The court could not enter fast enough to control what happened next. The mask, however, was not waiting for permission. One half of it slid across the marble without a hand touching it. Ethan felt the air change. Elara's calm fractured. She reached for the mirror behind her, but the lost circle brightened, holding the space around them like an invisible wall. The mask scraped forward another inch, then another, drawn toward the mark on her cheek. Ethan's body moved before his judgment caught up. "Do not touch it," Elara said sharply. "I was not planning to." That was only half true. He dropped his tool bag, knelt, and pulled out the first thing his hand found, a rubber-handled voltage clamp rated for industrial current and supernatural interference, or at least that was what the expensive label had promised. He slid the clamp between the crawling mask and Elara's boot. The silver half struck the tool and snapped shut around it with a clean metallic click. The force of the closing mechanism jerked the clamp out of his hand. Ethan stared at it. If that had reached her face, it would not have asked politely. Elara stared too. For the first time since he had entered the room, her royal mask of composure vanished completely, and beneath it was a flash of recognition, so painful Ethan almost looked away. "It has done that before," he said softly. He meant it as a question, but the mirrors recorded it as testimony. Elara did not answer. She did not have to. The court reacted for her. Voices broke across the great hall, overlapping in alarm and denial. Improper statement. The artifact is sacred. The human contaminates the right. The princess must be removed. The witness must be contained. Above them all, Adrian's voice cut through with practiced authority. "This incident has escalated beyond informal correction. Under the Veiled Heir statute, I petition the court to classify the human's presence as active interference." Queen Marceline did not look at him. Her eyes remained fixed on the mask clamped around Ethan's tool. Denied for the moment. Adrian went still. "Your Majesty, the court has seen the artifact move without command. Because the mark is exposed. Because the mask is broken," Elara said. The words rang through the chamber with enough force to turn every mirror toward her. She seemed surprised by her own voice, as if she had not meant to let that much truth escape. Ethan slowly rose, keeping himself between the crawling mask half and Elara without making it look like he thought she needed protection. He suspected she would hate that. She was not weak. That had never been the problem. The problem was that everyone had built a world around making her strength look like instability. His tablet buzzed on the floor beside his tool bag. The cracked screen filled with a warning from the palace system. Delayed and useless. Unauthorized exposure event detected. Witness law active. Remain stationary for court review. Then another line appeared beneath it, not in the tablet's normal font, but in red script that burned through the glass from beneath. First sight confirmed. True mark confirmed. Dawn hearing required. The words projected upward into the air, visible to every mirror. Ethan heard the court inhale as one body. Elara's face changed again, but this time it was not fear. It was the stunned stillness of someone who had been told all her life that the truth would destroy her, only to watch the law itself name that truth as valid. Adrian moved quickly after that. "The Dawn hearing will proceed under emergency marriage review," he announced. "The human has seen what no outsider may see. The court must preserve the heir's dignity and the bloodline's continuity. Until judgment, he remains bound to her presence." The phrase emergency marriage review rolled through the mirrors like a storm finding open water. Ethan looked from Adrian to the queen, then to Elara. He had walked through the door because someone sounded afraid. He had seen her face because she turned before either of them understood the cost. He had blocked the mask because letting it crawl back on her felt like watching a person be locked inside a story written by everyone except herself. 3 small actions. Entering. Seeing. Intervening. None of them heroic. None of them planned. Yet the palace had taken those moments and transformed them into law, witness, scandal, and the first open challenge to a succession ceremony older than his country. Elara stepped closer to him, not by choice exactly, but because the crimson circle tightened until they stood within arm's reach. Her voice dropped, so low only he could hear it before the mirrors stole it anyway. "You do not understand what they will try to make you say." Ethan kept his eyes on the court reflected. Around them. Then I guess I had better learn fast. The 4th bell began to ring. The 4th bell did not finish ringing. It fractured. The sound broke across the palace in layers, one note becoming 12, 12 becoming hundreds, until every mirror in the forbidden chamber trembled with a choir of ancient judgment. In the great hall below, The Crimson Veil court rose to its feet as one body, not in respect, but in shock so complete that even outrage seemed to arrive late. Ethan had expected shouting. He had expected guards, accusations, maybe the cold, efficient violence of a society that solved embarrassment by removing witnesses. What he saw instead was worse in its own way. Silence. Hundreds of vampires stood beneath the vaulted ceiling of the succession hall, their pale faces lifted toward the mirror record, their ceremonial masks and jeweled collars catching the red light, and not one of them seemed to know which law to obey first. The court had come prepared to watch Princess Elara kneel beneath a silver mask and have her future measured for her. They had not come prepared to see that same mask move like a trap. They had not come prepared to hear the palace name a human technician as first witness. And they had certainly not come prepared to watch the hidden crown mark of the veiled heir burn openly on Elara's cheek, while the old law demanded a dawn hearing before the court could bury the truth again. Queen Marceline descended from her throne slowly, each step sending a quiet ripple through the hall. Even through the mirror, Ethan felt the gravity of her movement. Nobles shifted aside without being asked. Servants lowered their eyes. Guards in black armor tightened their formation but did not draw weapons. The queen did not look angry, and somehow that made her more terrifying. Anger would have been human. This was older, colder, and much more controlled. She stopped at the center of the hall, directly beneath the largest mirror, so her reflection filled the black glass before Ethan and Elara. "No one enters the sanctum," she said. "No one removes the human. No one restores the mask until I give the command." Lord Adrian Vale turned toward her, with a graceful bow that did not hide the tension in his jaw. "Your Majesty, with respect, delay invites instability. The court has witnessed an exposed heir, a broken artifact, and an unauthorized human standing within sacred boundary. The emergency statutes are clear." "Then recite them," Queen Marceline said. The hall went colder. Adrian's eyes narrowed by the smallest measure. "Your Majesty, if you intend to use the law, Lord Vale, let the court hear every word." That was the first crack in the expected script, and every vampire in the hall felt it. Ethan did too, though he did not understand all the pieces yet. Adrian had expected the queen to accept his summary. Instead, she was forcing the law into the open, where the mirrors could record not only its conclusion but its language. A robed clerk near the lower dais stepped forward, hands trembling around a book bound in white leather and silver. He opened it with the solemn dread of a man handling something that might judge him back. Under the veiled heir statute, he read, voice thin but audible, "If the face and sovereign mark of a royal heir are revealed to an outsider before the completion of succession, and if the outsider is recognized by the palace mirrors as accidental witness rather than violator, conspirator, or chosen petitioner, said outsider shall be named first witness." The clerk swallowed. First witness may not be harmed, removed, altered, silenced, or separated from the heir until dawn review is complete. A murmur moved through the court. Ethan's pulse kicked hard against his ribs. May not be harmed was comforting in the same way a fragile bridge over a canyon was comforting. Technically useful, not something he wanted to test. The clerk continued. "If the revelation threatens the dignity, legitimacy, or continuity of the bloodline, the court may petition for corrective bond, memory sealing, exile judgment, or marriage review." At that phrase, the hall changed. Not loudly. Vampire courts seemed to specialize in reactions too controlled for human rooms. A few nobles turned sharply toward one another. Several older vampires lowered their eyes in calculation. The younger ones looked fascinated, as if a legend had just stepped out of a dusty book and put on a work jacket with Ethan's name stitched over the chest pocket. Marriage review. There it was again, not as a rumor now, not as Adrian's convenient declaration, but as a real clause inside a real law old enough to make insanity sound procedural. Elara stood beside Ethan with her face lifted to the mirrors, expression carved from ice. Only the pulse of the crown mark betrayed her. It flared once, then dimmed, like a star struggling behind cloud cover. "Corrective bond does not mean consent," she said. The clerk froze. The court froze with him. The princess had spoken against the law in the law zone chamber. Adrian answered before anyone else could. "It means preservation, Your Highness. It means preventing scandal from weakening the throne." "No," Elara said. It means turning my face into a crime and his accident into a chain. The words struck the hall harder than any shout. Ethan felt the mirrors record them. He felt, strangely, that the palace itself leaned closer. Adrian's polite concern thinned. The human has already interfered with a royal artifact. The human stopped the artifact from closing on me. Because he panicked. Ethan looked at the clamp still caught inside the silver mask half, then at Adrian's reflection. I did panic a little, he admitted. Several faces in the court snapped toward him, offended that he had spoken at all. Ethan kept going because fear had never made him especially wise. But the tool did not panic. The mask clamped down with enough force to break industrial-grade insulation. If that is normal ceremonial behavior, your ceremonies need better safety inspections. For half a second, nobody reacted. Then, somewhere in the great hall, one servant covered her mouth. It might have been fear. It might have been the smallest possible laugh. Either way, the sound vanished as quickly as it came, but not before Queen Marceline's eyes shifted toward Ethan. He could not tell whether she was about to protect him or have him stored in a very cold basement until dawn. Ethan Cole, she said, each syllable exact. You will answer only what I ask. Did my daughter invite you into the sanctum? No, the mirrors brightened. Did she ask you to look upon her face? No. Did she ask you to touch the mask? No. Adrian's expression sharpened. Your Majesty, the witness is untrained. His answers cannot account for enchantment, glamour, or subtle coercion. Queen Marceline did not look away from Ethan. Did Princess Elara use glamour on you? Ethan hesitated, because every vampire in the hall seemed to wait for the answer with a hunger that had nothing to do with blood. He thought of the moment he entered. Elara had been injured, frightened, furious, royal, radiant in the mirror light, but she had not pulled him toward her. If anything, she had wanted him gone before the world saw him there. No, Ethan said. She told me I should not have seen her. The mirrors flashed red, sealing the statement. A low sound moved through the court, not outrage this time, but uncertainty. Public uncertainty. Dangerous uncertainty. Adrian could work with anger. He could guide scandal. But uncertainty in a room of old powers was harder to control because it made people look for what else they had been told to accept. Queen Marceline turned at last toward the nobles. The witness record confirms accidental entry. The heir's statement confirms non-invitation. The mask's behavior is under review. Adrian stepped forward. Then the only lawful path is to preserve succession through emergency marriage review. Elara went very still. Ethan felt it beside him, as unmistakable as a light going out. Adrian lifted his voice so it carried to every corner of the hall and every mirror in the sanctum. The first witness has seen the unveiled heir and the true mark. Whether by accident or fate, the court cannot undo that sight. If he remains unattached, her dignity becomes contestable. If he is erased, the palace may reject the record. If he is exiled, foreign courts may challenge the succession. But if the witness is bound under court marriage until legitimacy is secured, the scandal becomes continuity. There it was, wrapped in velvet and law. Not punishment. Not romance. Strategy. The court reacted exactly as Adrian needed it to react. Shock became discussion. Discussion became possibility. Possibility became appetite. Ethan saw nobles who had wanted him removed 10 seconds ago begin to consider him as a tool. A human husband would not threaten them. A human husband could be controlled, dismissed, displayed when convenient, blamed when useful. Elara's face could be hidden again behind the language of protection. Her crown mark could be explained as a private matter witnessed only by her legal consort. The entire impossible truth could be folded into a marriage contract and locked in a drawer before sunrise. Ethan suddenly understood why Elara had been afraid. Not because they might kill him, because they might keep him, because they might use him as the final piece of a cage built so elegantly everyone would call it honor. Queen Marceline's expression did not change, but her eyes darkened. You ask this court to demand marriage from a daughter of my line before dawn. Adrian bowed. I ask this court to preserve her claim. No, Elara said again, and this time the words shook. Not from weakness, from the effort of saying it in a room trained not to hear her. The great hall turned toward the mirror where she stood unmasked, exposed, furious, and still somehow more royal than any of them. Ethan looked at her, then at the watching court, then at the broken mask on the floor. He had wondered, when the mirrors first opened, whether he would be rewarded, killed, erased, or locked away. Now the answer forming in the eyes of the nobles was worse and stranger. They did not want to destroy him. They wanted to make him useful. The ancient voice rose from the mirrors once more, silencing every whisper. Dawn review required. First witness shall remain within 10 steps of the veiled heir. Court may petition bond, exile, memory sealing, or marriage. Judgment reserved until bloodlight. A red line flared between Ethan and Elara, measuring the space. 10 steps. Less than the length of a small apartment kitchen. Less than the distance between safety and scandal. Queen Marceline raised her hand, and the guards in the hall lowered their heads. Bring them to the antechamber of succession, she commanded. If the court wishes to demand a marriage, it will do so with the witness alive, the heir awake, and every mirror open. Adrian smiled faintly, as if that was exactly what he wanted. Elara did not smile at all. Ethan bent slowly, picked up his tool bag, and kept his eyes away from the mask. Around them, the forbidden chamber unlocked its sealed door. The palace had chosen not to bury the mistake. It had chosen to parade it into court. The palace did not send guards into the forbidden chamber so much as it rearranged itself until Ethan and Elara had no path except the one it wanted them to take. The door opened onto a corridor that had not been there before, long and narrow, walled in black marble veined with red light, its ceiling high enough to swallow the glow from Ethan's wrist display. On either side, mirrors floated where windows should have been, following them as they moved. Ethan stayed exactly where the law forced him to stay, within 10 steps of Princess Elara, close enough to feel the cold radiating from her composure, and far enough to remember that every noble in the palace now considered the space between them a political weapon. For armored guards walked ahead, for walked behind. None of them looked at Ethan directly. That bothered him more than open hatred would have. Hatred at least recognized a person. This was worse. This was the careful avoidance people gave to a dangerous object being transported before the experts decided whether it should be locked away or placed on display. Elara walked beside him without touching him, her face uncovered beneath the watching mirrors, the crimson crown mark on her cheek dimmed but not gone. Every few steps, the red line on the floor adjusted to keep them inside the invisible boundary of the witness law. If Ethan slowed, the line tightened around his boots. If Elara moved too far ahead, the mirrors chimed softly in warning. The first time it happened, Ethan stopped instinctively, and every guard stopped with him. Elara turned her head just enough to look at him. "Do not test the distance," she said. "I was not trying to. The palace does not care what you were trying to do. I am starting to understand that." She faced forward again, and for a few seconds the only sounds were their footsteps and the soft metallic whisper of Elara's ceremonial gown moving over the floor. Then the corridor bent left, though Ethan was almost certain it had been straight a moment ago. He glanced at his tablet. The screen no longer showed a map. It showed 2 glowing points, one labeled heir and the other labeled witness, circling each other inside a red boundary. Beneath them, a warning repeated in formal block letters. Proximity required until dawn review. Separation will be treated as evidence tampering. Ethan let out a slow breath. Evidence tampering. Great. I am legally paperwork now. A guard behind him made a small sound that might have been disapproval. Elara did not smile, but the corner of her mouth shifted so slightly he might have imagined it. "You are fortunate. Some courts would classify you as contamination. That is less comforting than you think." Comfort is not a common feature of Crimson Veil law. They reached a pair of enormous doors carved from pale wood and set with thin strips of silver. The guard stopped. One placed a hand against the door, and the silver lines glowed in recognition before swinging open. Beyond them waited an antechamber larger than Ethan's old apartment building lobby back in Chicago, circular and silent, with a domed ceiling painted in black stars. A fire burned in a long white hearth without smoke. Tall mirrors ringed the walls, but these were covered in dark cloth, as if someone had decided the room needed privacy and the palace had reluctantly allowed the illusion. A table stood near the center with water, a silver tea service, untouched documents, and 2 chairs placed exactly 9 steps apart. Ethan noticed that immediately. Elara noticed him noticing. "They measured," she said. "Of course they did. The court measures everything. Except pain, apparently. He regretted saying it the moment the words left his mouth. Not because they were false, but because they were too intimate for a room full of listening walls. Elara's gaze moved to him, sharp and unreadable. Before she could answer, Queen Marceline appeared in the doorway behind them, and the temperature seemed to drop by 10 degrees. The guards bowed. Ethan did not know the local gesture, so he did the American thing and stood as straight as possible while trying not to look guilty for existing. The Queen entered with Lord Adrian Vale a few steps behind her and 3 robed legal clerks carrying mirrored tablets. Marceline looked first at Elara's uncovered face. For one moment, the Queen's expression changed in a way Ethan could not interpret. It was not shock anymore. It was something quieter, almost private, buried so quickly beneath royalty that he wondered if Elara had seen it too. If she had, she gave no sign. Until dawn, Queen Marceline said, "This chamber will serve as holding ground for the heir and first witness." Ethan blinked. Holding ground. Adrian answered before the Queen could, his tone smooth and instructive. A neutral legal space. Neither prison nor sanctuary. You are not accused yet, Mr. Cole. That yet is doing a lot of work. Adrian smiled with his mouth and nothing else. You have a talent for making your position more delicate. Elara's voice cut in coldly. His position was made delicate when the court chose to treat an accident as an opportunity. Adrian turned his polite smile toward her. Your Highness, no one chose the law. Men write laws. Then they hide behind them and pretend stone did it. The clerks went very still. Ethan kept his face carefully blank, but inside he felt the force of the sentence land. Elara was not merely angry. She was naming the room. Queen Marceline raised one hand, and the air settled. Enough. The dawn review will determine whether the witness record threatens succession. Until then, the proximity clause remains active. You will both stay in this chamber. The witness may not be questioned without the heir present. The heir may not be masked without the witness present. Neither of you may be moved beyond 10 steps from the other unless the palace releases the measure. Ethan looked from the Queen to Elara. So we are stuck together because the law thinks separating us would let someone change the story. In simple terms, Marceline said, yes. And in not simple terms, the palace has accepted you as the first uncontrolled observer of my daughter's sovereign mark. Until dawn, your memory and her bloodline are tied together as evidence. If you disappear, the court can argue the record was corrupted. If she disappears, the court can argue the mark was unstable. The law preserves both of you by refusing to let either of you become private. Ethan almost laughed, but there was no humor in it. That is a terrifying definition of protection. It is the only one this court respects, Elara said. Her voice was steady, but Ethan saw her hands at her sides, fingers flexing once, then stilling. Adrian stepped toward the covered mirrors. For safety, the heir should be secured in the inner partition and the witness placed near the outer door. They will remain within distance while preventing unnecessary interaction. The red line on the floor flared at once, bright enough to silence the room. One of the covered mirrors rang beneath its cloth. The ancient voice spoke, low and final. Division denied. Witness and heir must remain mutually visible. Ethan turned toward the mirror. Mutually visible? Elara's jaw tightened. Queen Marceline closed her eyes for half a second. Adrian's smile vanished. The law had just refused his first attempt to turn proximity into isolation. Ethan understood only part of it, but enough to feel the shape of the trap changing. They could not be separated by walls, screens, or polite arrangements. They had to see each other. The court had built a system designed to expose truth, and for once, it was applying that rule to the people who usually controlled exposure. Adrian recovered smoothly. Then attendants will remain inside. Again the mirror rang. Private review required. Court observation suspended until petition. One of the clerks nearly dropped his tablet. Elara looked genuinely startled now. That clause has not activated in centuries. What does it mean? Ethan asked. She looked at him, and for the first time since the chamber, her expression held something other than warning. Not trust, but the distant beginning of recognition. It means the palace believes the court itself may influence testimony. Ethan absorbed that. So the haunted legal architecture trusts us more than it trusts them. Do not sound pleased. Haunted legal architecture has ruined many lives. I will put that on a shirt if I survive the night. This time, there was no mistaking it. Elara almost smiled. It lasted less than a second, but it changed the room more than the fire did. Queen Marceline saw it. So did Adrian. The queen stepped back first. The law has spoken. We will reconvene at first bloodlight. Food and water will remain. No one enters unless the chamber permits it. Adrian's voice sharpened beneath its silk. Your Majesty, leaving the heir alone with him invites speculation. Marceline looked at him then, and Ethan saw what it meant when a vampire queen allowed even a sliver of her power into her eyes. The court is already choking on speculation, Lord Vale. Let it learn patience. Adrian bowed. As you command. But when he looked at Ethan, there was a message in his calm eyes as clear as any spoken threat. This is not over. The doors closed behind them with a sound like judgment being postponed. For the first time since Ethan had stepped into the forbidden room, there were no visible nobles staring through mirrors, no clerks reciting clauses, no guards measuring his breath. There was only the antechamber, the covered glass, the smokeless fire, the red line binding the floor, and Princess Elara standing 8 steps away from him with her face uncovered because the law demanded she remain visible to a man she had not chosen. Ethan set his tool bag carefully beside one chair and did not sit. I am sorry, he said. Elara looked toward the covered mirrors instead of him. I told you not to apologize. That was before we were legally trapped in a room together. The apology does not change the trap. No, but it tells you I know it is one. She turned back to him slowly. In the firelight, the crown mark on her cheek looked less like a symbol and more like a wound made of light. Most men in your position would ask what this means for them. I am getting there, Ethan said. But I figured the person who had a mask crawl toward her face gets first place in line. The silence that followed was not comfortable, but it was different. Less like a wall, more like a locked door with someone standing on both sides, listening. Elara moved to the chair nearest the hearth and sat with the posture of someone taught never to collapse, even when alone. The red boundary dimmed, approving the distance. Ethan sat across from her because the palace clearly wanted theater and because standing made him feel like a defendant. For a while, neither spoke. The fire burned white. The covered mirrors remained still. Somewhere beyond the doors, an entire supernatural court prepared arguments about marriage, memory, exile, and power. Inside the room, a human technician and an unmasked vampire princess sat 9 steps apart, forced by ancient law to look at each other without the protection of distance. And in that unwanted visibility, something more dangerous than scandal began very quietly. The possibility that they might start telling the truth. For several minutes after the doors closed, Ethan and Elara sat on opposite sides of the white fire with the careful stillness of people who had been placed inside the same cage and were trying not to blame each other for the bars. The antechamber felt less like a room than a pause in the palace's breathing. Beyond the covered mirrors, the court was no doubt splitting itself into factions, shaping words like blades and calling them petitions. But inside the circle of enforced visibility, the silence had weight. Ethan could hear the soft tick of cooling metal from the broken clamp in his tool bag. He could hear the fire whispering without smoke. He could hear, every so often, the faint chime of the witness line on the floor whenever he shifted too far back in his chair or Elara leaned too close to the hearth. The law did not care whether either of them wanted comfort. It cared only that they remained close enough to be used. Elara sat with her hands folded in her lap, posture perfect, eyes fixed on a point beyond Ethan's shoulder. Without the mask, her face should have looked freer. Instead, she looked more exposed than any person Ethan had ever seen fully dressed in a room full of shadows. The crimson crown mark on her cheek had dimmed to a slow pulse beneath her pale skin, and every pulse caught in the firelight, delicate and unmistakable. Ethan tried not to stare. Not because the mark was unpleasant. It was the opposite. It was so striking that his eyes kept wanting to return to it, the way eyes return to a candle in a dark room. But he understood, with a certainty that settled deeper than fear, that everyone in this palace had spent years staring at that mark as evidence, threat, leverage, destiny, problem, proof, and scandal. He refused to become one more pair of eyes taking something from her. So he looked at the hearth, at the table, at the covered mirrors, at his own scraped knuckles, anywhere but the secret the court had made public without her consent. Elara noticed anyway. Of course she did. You are pretending not to look, she said. Ethan kept his gaze on the fire. I am trying not to be rude. That is not the same thing. No, but it is the version I can manage under supernatural legal supervision. She studied him for a moment, and when she spoke again, the sharpness in her voice had softened by a degree. Most people look, even those who know better, especially those who know better. I am guessing they all have opinions. They call them concerns. Ethan nodded slowly. That tracks. She tilted her head. You speak as if you know this kind of court. Not this kind. No vampires. No haunted mirrors. No marriage clauses from the Middle Ages. Older than that. Of course it is. He finally looked up, not at the mark, but at her eyes. But I know rooms where everyone already decided what the truth is allowed to be before the person living it gets a chance to speak. For the first time, Elara did not answer immediately. The firelight moved across her face, turning the crimson in her eyes almost brown for one fragile second, something warmer and more human than the court would have tolerated. And what did you do in such rooms? She asked. Ethan thought of Chicago again, of the loading dock, of Rachel's trembling hands wrapped around a paper cup of coffee gone cold. I told the truth. Did it help? He leaned back, and the witness line chimed in warning. He leaned forward again with a tired sigh. It helped her. Elara heard what he did not say. But not you. No. The word came out simple, without bitterness at first, then gathered some on the way to silence. No, it did not help me. Elara's fingers shifted in her lap. Then why do it again? That question could have sounded like contempt from anyone else. From her, it sounded almost unwillingly curious, as if he had revealed a flaw in his survival instincts, and she could not understand why he had not corrected it. Ethan considered giving the easy answer, something noble and clean about conscience or doing the right thing. But the room was full of hidden laws, and he was tired of clean answers designed for other people's comfort. Because not doing it would have made me someone I did not want to live with, he said. Elara looked away first. Not quickly, not weakly, but as if the sentence had found a place in her she had not granted him permission to touch. The white fire bent toward her, though there was no wind. The covered mirrors remained still. For the first time since the door opened, Ethan felt the chamber become less interested in judgment and more interested in the two people trapped inside it. Elara rose from her chair. The witness line flared. Ethan stood too, more out of reflex than understanding, and the line dimmed once they were moving within the required distance. She crossed to the nearest covered mirror and stopped before it, her hand hovering inches from the dark cloth. These mirrors have watched every succession in my line for 1,100 years, she said. They have recorded vows, betrayals, abdications, punishments, adoptions, coronations, and 3 civil wars that the human world never knew happened. My first memory is of being held up to one of them so the court could examine my eyes. Ethan said nothing. He sensed that if he interrupted, she might close forever. I was 5, she continued. My mother stood behind me. Lord Adrian stood beside the mirror with a legal clerk and a physician of blood. I remember his gloves. White. Perfectly clean. I remember thinking that only terrible things were handled by people in gloves that clean. Her fingers touched the cloth, not pulling it away, just pressing into the fabric. They said my eyes carried the right fire. My blood answered the palace. The court applauded. My mother wept when she thought I could not see. That sounds like a good thing, Ethan said carefully. It was supposed to be. Elara's mouth tightened. Then the mark appeared. The crown on her cheek pulsed once, as if summoned by its own history. Not during a ritual, not in front of a council, not in the clean legal way they prefer. It appeared while I was in the West Garden, chasing winter moths through the hedges. I had dirt on my dress. There were leaves in my hair. I was laughing when a servant saw the mark form beneath my skin. By nightfall, 3 nobles had declared it a sign of uncontrollable blood. 2 claimed the palace had chosen me too early. 1 suggested I should be hidden until the court could determine whether the mark was sovereign or cursed. Ethan's jaw tightened. You were a kid. I was an heir. She said it as if those 2 facts had never been allowed to exist together. The next morning, Lord Adrian presented the mourning mask as a temporary safeguard. Temporary. That word has lasted 187 years. The number settled between them like snow falling inside a sealed room. Ethan tried to imagine wearing anything for that long because other people feared what his face might mean. He could not. The scale of it pushed beyond human instinct, but the shape of it was familiar. A child told that comfort was danger. A woman told that hiding was duty. A person turned into an argument before she was old enough to answer back. "Did your mother know?" he asked softly. The question changed Elara's expression more than any accusation would have. For a heartbeat, she looked toward the doors, not with anger, but with something closer to grief. My mother knew what she was told, that the mask stabilized the mark. That exposure would invite challenge. That challenge would invite war. That the court needed time. Queens are skilled at commanding armies and terrible at noticing when trusted men turn love into policy. Ethan sat with that. And Adrian? Adrian became indispensable. Convenient. Very. Elara finally drew her hand back from the covered mirror. He was my father's favorite strategist before my father died. Afterward, he advised my mother through the succession disputes. He always spoke gently. That is what made him dangerous. Cruel men are easy to resist when they snarl. Adrian never snarled. He offered solutions. He offered language. He offered reasons why every locked door was for my safety. Ethan thought of board members saying complicated situation, supervisors saying patience, administrators saying process. I know that kind of man. Elara turned to him. You cannot. Not truly. No, not truly. But enough to hate the shape of it. That answer seemed to satisfy her more than false understanding would have. She walked back toward the hearth, and Ethan adjusted his steps automatically, keeping within the law's invisible leash. The movement should have felt ridiculous, like two strangers learning the steps to a dance neither had agreed to perform. Instead, it made the trap more intimate. Every decision had to account for the other person. Every distance had to be negotiated. Every silence belonged to both of them. Elara stopped near the table where the tea service sat untouched. The cups were thin porcelain, white as bone, rimmed in red. She reached for the pot, then hesitated. Ethan noticed the hesitation before he could stop himself. Is that safe? He asked. Her eyes flicked to him. The tea. This palace has laws about mirrors, masks, doors, proximity, bloodlight, and probably salad forks. I am not making assumptions. There it was again, the almost smile, smaller this time, but less accidental. The tea is safe. Great. First win of the night. She poured one cup, then paused over the second. Do humans still drink tea under stress? Or is coffee your national ritual? Coffee is the national ritual. Tea is for people who own matching furniture. Do you? I own a folding chair and a workbench I keep meaning to fix. She poured him tea. The gesture was tiny, absurdly formal, and yet Ethan understood that in a court where every object could symbolize a claim, offering him anything of her own choosing mattered. He accepted the cup with both hands, careful not to brush her fingers. The tea smelled like winter oranges and smoke. Thank you, he said. Do not thank me too warmly. The court may petition that hospitality implies intent. Ethan froze with the cup halfway to his mouth. Elara watched him for 2 seconds before saying, that was a joke. He stared at her. You make jokes? Rarely. That one was terrifying. Then I chose well. He laughed before he could stop himself. Not loudly. Not long. Just enough that the chamber felt briefly less like a legal trap and more like a room where two exhausted people had found the edge of absurdity and decided to stand on it together. Elara looked startled by the sound. Then, to Ethan's surprise, some of the tension left her shoulders. She lifted her own cup, but did not drink. You are not what I expected, she said. I am guessing you expected more screaming. At first. Reasonable. Then I expected bargaining. Ethan looked down at the tea. What kind of bargaining? Protection. Wealth. Immortality. A place at court. Men offered less opportunity have asked for more. I fix lights for a living. I am not qualified to rule anything bigger than a breaker panel. Do not pretend humility is the same as innocence. Her voice sharpened, but not with full force. More like testing the strength of a bridge before crossing. If the court pushes marriage review, some will say you can survive only by accepting. Some will promise you safety if you claim me. Some will tell you that a human man with no title would be foolish to refuse a princess. Ethan met her gaze. And what would you say? The question hung between them. Elara's fingers tightened around her cup. I would say the law has spent my life turning my body into territory and my silence into consent. I would say if you use this accident to own even 1 inch of me, I will never forgive you, whether the court blesses it or not. There was the dangerous woman the palace feared. Not because she could command power, though she clearly could. Because even cornered, exposed, and bound by a law designed to turn her into a symbol, she still knew the difference between being protected and being possessed. Ethan set his cup down. Then I will not claim you. Elara stared at him. You say that as if it is simple. It is not simple. I understand it may get me killed, exiled, sealed, married by paperwork, or whatever else the haunted legal architecture has on the menu. But the answer is simple. I did not open that door to take something from you. You opened it because you heard fear. Yes. And if that fear was bait, then it worked. That earned a real expression from her. Not a smile exactly, but something bright and pain that crossed her face before she could hide it. You are either honest or very foolish. Those overlap more often than people admit. Elara looked toward the covered mirrors again. No one has asked if the mask hurts in years. Ethan's chest tightened. He remembered asking her in the outline of his own thoughts before, but not aloud. Now the question arrived naturally, quietly, without ceremony. Does it? She closed her eyes. The answer, when it came, was almost too soft for the room. Yes. Ethan did not move. He did not reach for her. He did not make the mistake of turning her pain into an invitation. He only waited. Elara opened her eyes again, and this time they were not entirely royal. It is not constant, she said. That would almost be easier. Constant pain becomes weather. The mask is worse when I speak against what they expect. Worse when the mark tries to show. Worse when I am near mirrors during ritual. It tightens. It steals breath. Sometimes words. Not enough for anyone to call it cruelty. Just enough to make obedience look natural. Ethan imagined a device designed not to break a person, but to train the room to prefer her quiet. His hands curled around his knees. That is not protection. No, that is control. The covered mirrors remained still, but the white fire rose higher. Elara looked at him then, not as a human, not as a witness, not as a threat, but as if he had spoken a word she had been waiting almost 2 centuries to hear from someone outside her own mind. Control. Simple. Unglamorous. True. Ethan stood slowly. The witness line. Brightened, but did not object. He crossed to his tool bag and opened it. Elara watched every movement with predatory attention. He took out a compact light meter, a roll of insulating tape, and a small adjustable lamp used for testing low-voltage fixtures. What are you doing? She asked. My job. This is not the time to repair palace lighting. Respectfully, Your Highness, this is exactly the time. He placed the small lamp on the table, angled it toward the hearth, then adjusted the hood until the reflected glare moved away from Elara's face. The room had been lit from above and below by white fire and mirror glow, every angle designed to expose. It made the crown mark blaze, made her cheek the center of every glance, made privacy impossible even without the court watching. Ethan could not change the law. He could not dismiss the hearing. He could not free her from the witness line. But he could change the light. He dimmed the lamp, shifted the angle, and softened the reflection bouncing from the silver tea service. The effect was small, almost invisible to anyone who did not live by light, but the room changed. The fire stopped attacking her face. The mark remained visible, as the law required, but no longer looked like it was being presented for inspection. Elara sat very still. Why? She asked. Ethan tightened a strip of tape around the lamp bracket. Because everyone keeps pointing the room at you like you are evidence. You look tired. He glanced up, then quickly back at the lamp. Also, the lighting was terrible. For a long moment, Elara said nothing. Then she touched her cheek, not to hide the mark, but as if feeling it under kinderlight made it belong to her again. No one has ever adjusted a room for me, she said. Ethan's voice stayed low. They should have. The words did not heal anything. They did not undo 187 years behind silver. They did not remove the court waiting beyond the doors with its petitions and elegant cages. But something in Elara's posture changed. A fraction of guardedness loosened. A fraction of the distance between them became chosen instead of measured. Outside the antechamber, the palace continued preparing for dawn review, and the supernatural world still intended to decide what Ethan Cole was worth as a witness, a threat, or a husband. Inside, under softened light, the vampire princess who had been hidden for most of her life looked across 9 steps at the human who had accidentally seen her and did not look away for the wrong reasons. For the first time that night, The law was not the only thing holding them in the same room. The softened light in the antechamber lasted exactly 11 minutes before the court found a way to turn kindness into evidence. It began with the covered mirrors. One by one, the dark cloths over the glass lifted without hands, not all the way, only enough for thin red lines of reflection to appear beneath them. Ethan noticed first because he had spent most of his adult life watching how light behaved when a room was about to change. The glow from the hearth bent toward the mirrors. The lamp he had adjusted flickered twice. Elara set down her tea without a sound, and the fragile quiet between them closed like a book someone else had decided they were finished reading. "Petition," she said. Ethan looked toward the nearest mirror. "They can just interrupt? They can try." That seems like a yes with expensive vocabulary. The mirror directly across from them brightened, revealing not the full succession hall, but a formal council chamber lined with black pillars and silver banners. The nobles were no longer gathered as a single shocked audience. They had divided themselves into factions, and somehow that was worse. Shock had become organization. Organization had become opposition. Ethan saw clusters of vampire lords and ladies standing behind carved tables, each group marked by a different crest: a white thorn, a red chalice, a black moon, a crowned wolf, a hand holding a closed eye. They looked less like guests at a ceremony and more like attorneys preparing to dismantle a life with impeccable manners. Lord Adrian Vale stood at the center, calm again, his dark coat perfectly arranged, his silver cane resting against one gloved hand. Beside him were 3 elders in pale robes and a younger noblewoman whose expression of disgust seemed reserved entirely for Ethan's work jacket. Queen Marceline was not visible. That detail mattered. Elara rose from her chair, and Ethan rose with her because the red line on the floor tightened before he could decide otherwise. "Do not answer unless directly instructed by the Queen or the chamber law," Elara said under her breath. "What if they insult me?" "They will." "What if they insult you?" Her eyes moved to him. "They will do that more politely." The mirror rang once, and Adrian bowed to Elara as if the entire night had been nothing more than a procedural inconvenience. "Your Highness, the Emergency Council petitions for immediate classification of the human's influence." Elara's expression returned to its public shape, cold enough to freeze any warmth that might have survived between them. "The Dawn Review is already set. The Dawn Review concerns succession status. This petition concerns proximity contamination." Ethan stared at him. "I am sorry, did you say contamination?" Elara's eyes flicked warning at him, but the nobles had already heard. The young noblewoman stepped forward with a smile that did not reach her eyes. "Mr. Cole, no offense is intended. Human presence affects royal perception. Your species responds to sympathy with attachment and to beauty with possession. The court must determine whether the princess's judgment has been compromised by your emotional volatility." Ethan slowly turned to Elara. "No offense intended," she says, "before insulting my entire species and my nervous system." "Lady Voss specializes in that," Elara said. Lady Voss's smile sharpened. "And Her Highness specializes in mistaking defiance for dignity." The air changed. The crown mark on Elara's cheek pulsed once, bright enough to cast a red edge along her jaw. Ethan felt the urge to step forward and had to stop himself. Not because he was afraid, although he was absolutely afraid, but because Elara did not need him to perform outrage on her behalf. She was perfectly capable of being furious with royal precision. "State your petition," Elara said. Adrian inclined his head. "First, the court moves to declare Ethan Cole socially incompatible with royal witness status." One of the pale-robed elders opened a scroll. "Grounds: no noble bloodline, no supernatural rank, no treaty title, no court education, no military command, no property within recognized knight territories, no immortality, no capacity to understand bloodline consequence, and no cultural preparation for proximity to an unmasked heir." Ethan listened to the list with an odd detachment. It was not even personal enough to hurt properly. They were not describing him as a man. They were reading the absence of everything their world valued. No title, no rank, no lineage, no centuries behind his name, no reason, in their eyes, for a princess's fate to bend around the mistake of someone who paid rent, changed filters, drank gas station coffee, and knew the fastest route around Boston traffic at 3 in the morning. Elara's voice cut through the list. The law recognized him. The law recognized an event, Adrian replied. It did not crown him with wisdom. Nor has wisdom been required of half the men in this court. A few faces in the mirror went dangerously still. Ethan fought the terrible urge to laugh. Lady Voss recovered first. Your Highness proves the point. Already the human's presence encourages public disrespect. No, Elara said. His presence has revealed how much disrespect was already waiting for permission to speak. Adrian tapped his cane once against the floor. The mirror image widened to show more nobles behind him, many nodding now, some with visible irritation, others with fear disguised as moral concern. Second, he continued, the court petitions to classify the unmasking as a crisis of perception. Whether intentional or accidental, the heir's face has been seen by an outsider before succession. If left unresolved, rival courts may claim the Crimson Veil throne is exposed, unstable, or dependent upon human testimony. The political damage cannot be ignored. Ethan understood that part too well. They were turning Elara's face into a national security problem. They were taking a private violation and scaling it upward until compassion sounded irresponsible. And your solution is marriage review, Elara said. Adrian spread his hands. It is one lawful solution. It is the solution that benefits you. It benefits continuity. You always call yourself continuity when you want control. The word struck hard. Several elders murmured. Lady Voss looked toward Adrian, but his expression remained composed. Your Highness, I have spent decades protecting your claim. You have spent decades explaining why I was not ready to hold it. Because others would have challenged you. Others, or you? For the first time, Adrian did not answer immediately. The pause was short, perhaps less than a second, but the mirrors saw it, and the room felt it. Ethan saw Elara register it too. Some part of her had suspected. Some part had known. But suspicion kept inside a person was survivable. Suspicion spoken aloud before enemies became a bridge that might collapse beneath her. Adrian's voice cooled. The third petition addresses that accusation. Given Her Highness's emotional state, the court requests temporary restoration of the mourning mask until dawn review. Elara went utterly still. Ethan felt the line on the floor flare before he understood why. The mask was not in the room, but the mention of it had power enough to wake the law. Adrian continued, each word clean and terrible. The mask will not be used to silence. It will stabilize the royal mark, prevent further visual provocation, and allow the heir to participate in proceedings without escalating factional unrest. Ethan had heard the same kind of language in human rooms. Stabilize, prevent, participate. Words designed to make control sound like care. Before he could stop himself, he spoke. You mean put the thing back on her, because the room got uncomfortable seeing what was under it. The mirror went silent. Elara's head turned slightly toward him. Adrian's eyes settled on Ethan with patient disdain. Mr. Cole, your opinion is not requested. That is fine. I have a lot of experience giving unwanted testimony. Lady Voss laughed softly. How charming. The repairman imagines himself a witness in matters older than his nation. The insult landed exactly where she aimed it. Ethan felt it, the reminder of scale, of smallness. America felt young in this room. His life felt shorter than the time some of these people had probably spent choosing jewelry. He had no bloodline that mattered to them, no ancestral estate, no supernatural inheritance, no argument wrapped in silver and precedent. He was just a tired man with a tool bag standing too close to a princess because he heard fear through a door. Then Elara stepped half a pace toward him, and the line adjusted, allowing it. Do not mistake age for importance, Lady Voss. Mold is also old. Ethan closed his mouth very tightly. Several nobles looked scandalized enough to faint. If vampires did that sort of thing. Lady Voss's smile disappeared. Adrian's hand tightened around his cane. Your Highness, he said, this is precisely why the court is concerned. You defend him as though his place beside you is chosen. The words hung there, delicate and dangerous. Ethan felt the trap open beneath them. If Elara denied him too strongly, the court could isolate him as disposable. If she defended him too clearly, they would use that defense as proof of attachment, instability, or intent. The opposition was not only trying to remove him, it was trying to make any kindness between them politically poisonous. Elara understood. Her face became unreadable again. His place beside me is required by law. For now, Adrian said. And after dawn, shall a human technician remain royal witness? Shall he advise the throne because he adjusted a lamp and made a speech? Shall the Crimson Veil Court explain to every clan from Montreal to New Orleans that its heir's legitimacy depends on a mortal contractor who stumbled into a private room? The factions in the mirror murmured louder. The argument had found its audience. It was not only prejudice, though there was plenty of that. It was fear. Fear of ridicule. Fear of weakness. Fear that a system built on ancient blood could be shaken by someone ordinary telling the truth plainly enough for the mirrors to hear. An elder from the Black Moon faction stepped forward, voice brittle with age. There is also the question of human ambition. We cannot assume modesty. If marriage review proceeds, he may request title, protection, compensation, or political influence. If it does not, he may sell the story to human authorities. Ethan stared at him. Sell the story? Humans sell everything, the elder said, especially things they do not understand. Ethan felt anger rise, hot and unwelcome. He thought of every strange job he had taken without asking questions because humans and vampires both needed lights to work, doors to open, kitchens to pass inspection, and emergency exits that did not kill people during evacuations. He thought of the housekeeper from Baltimore lowering her voice in the service hall, of human staff moving quietly through palaces that would never remember their names. Humans sold labor because immortals kept buying it cheaply and then acting shocked when workers had eyes. You hired humans to maintain this palace, Ethan said. You gave us maps, badges, liability waivers, and half-translated warnings, then sent me into a wing where the corridors rearranged themselves. If you wanted sacred privacy protected from ordinary people, maybe do not route the ordinary people through the walls holding up your sacred privacy. The mirror flared red, recording every word. Ethan realized too late that he had stopped sounding scared. The nobles realized it too. That seemed to offend them more than anything else. Adrian's voice dropped. Careful, Mr. Cole. A witness who becomes hostile may be reclassified. Elara moved before Ethan could answer. Not much. She simply stepped into the space beside him, still not touching, still within the law, but close enough that the mirror framed them together. The court saw it. Ethan felt the entire council chamber sharpen. He is not hostile, Elara said. He is inconvenient. I understand why this court struggles to tell the difference. The impact was immediate. Voices erupted across the mirror, controlled but numerous, overlapping legal objections and offended titles. Lady Voss accused the princess of humiliating the noble houses. The Black Moon elder demanded separate questioning. Another lord insisted the human be memory sealed after dawn regardless of the ruling. Someone from the Red Chalice faction argued that marriage review should happen immediately, to contain the scandal before foreign envoys learned of the mark. Another suggested Ethan be declared a ceremonial husband only, with no rights, no proximity, and no recognition beyond the legal closure of the incident. Each proposal wrapped itself around the same ugly center. Ethan was too low to matter, but somehow too dangerous to ignore. Elara was too royal to own her own face, but not trusted enough to speak for her own future. Together, by accident, they had made visible a contradiction the court could not tolerate. The mirror rang again, and Queen Marceline's reflection finally appeared above the council, larger than the others, her face pale and severe beneath her crown. The chamber fell quiet at once. I have heard the petitions, she said. Adrian bowed. Then your majesty understands the urgency. I understand fear wearing the robes of procedure. A flicker moved through the nobles. Marceline looked at Elara, then Ethan. The court may oppose the witness. The court may challenge his suitability. The court may petition marriage review at dawn. But until bloodlight, no mask will touch my daughter's face, and no noble will question the witness outside her presence. Elara's expression did not change, but Ethan saw her hand close around the back of the chair beside her. Your Majesty, Adrian said, too smooth now. That restraint may cost us control of the narrative. Marceline's eyes shifted to him. Perhaps the narrative is overdue for losing control. The Queen's reflection faded before anyone could answer. For one breath, the opposition stood exposed in its own silence. Then Adrian turned his gaze toward Ethan, and the polished mask of concern returned. Enjoy Her Majesty's mercy while it lasts, Mr. Cole. At dawn, the court will ask what you are worth. I suggest you consider carefully whether a man with nothing can afford to refuse what we offer." The mirrors darkened one by one, but Adrian's final look remained in the glass a heartbeat longer than the rest. Then the cloths fell back into place, and the antechamber was private again. Ethan realized his hands were shaking only when he reached for the chair. Elara noticed, but did not comment. That Mercy felt deliberate. Outside the room, an ancient society had just made its position clear. He was unworthy of standing beside her, unqualified to speak for what he had seen, too human to be trusted, too poor to be honorable, too temporary to matter. Yet somehow, by refusing to behave like a tool, he had become a threat large enough for nobles to gather against him. Elara stood beside the softened lamp, her uncovered face half in shadow, half in firelight. "Now you understand," she said. Ethan looked at the covered mirrors. "They do not just want me gone." No, her voice was quiet. "They want you to agree that you were never really here." He turned back to her. The red witness line glowed faintly between their feet, the law still holding them close, the court still waiting beyond the doors. "That is going to be a problem," Ethan said. Elara studied him for a long moment. "For you, for them." The answer surprised them both. Not because it was brave, because it was tired, plain, and already decided. Somewhere deep in the palace, the nobles prepared their dawn arguments. In the antechamber, under a lamp adjusted by human hands, the lowest-ranking man in Crimson Vale Palace had just become the one witness the highest court in the night could not easily bend. Ethan did not sleep because the law did not seem to allow the room to become harmless enough for sleep. The antechamber remained warm, quiet, and perfectly arranged, but every object in it had begun to feel like part of a trial waiting to happen. The covered mirrors did not move again, yet Ethan could feel a tension pressing from beyond them, hundreds of old minds rehearsing the same questions in different shapes. What is a human witness worth? What can he be made to sign? What kind of man sells truth for survival? Across the softened light, Elara sat with one hand resting near her untouched cup, her face uncovered, her posture composed with the terrible discipline of someone who had learned never to appear tired in rooms where weakness became law. The crown mark on her cheek pulsed slowly, no longer flaring, no longer hiding, simply existing. Ethan found that more powerful than any dramatic glow. It made her look less like a symbol and more like a person who had carried a secret so long that even truth felt heavy. Sometime after the court's petition faded, and before the first gray hint of dawn touched the palace roof, a narrow panel opened in the wall beside the hearth. No servant entered. No guard announced himself. A single black folder slid out onto a silver tray, followed by a pen made of white bone and gold. The panel closed again. Ethan looked at it. Elara did not move, but the air around her changed. "Do not touch that," she said. "That sounds like advice with a backstory." "It is an offer." "From who?" "Adrian, most likely. Or someone who wants me to believe it is from him." Ethan stood carefully. The witness line brightened, and Elara stood with him, irritation flashing across her face for half a second at the forced movement. "Sorry," he said. "Do not apologize for the law. I am more apologizing for having legs." She did not smile this time. Her attention stayed on the folder as if it were something venomous. Ethan approached the tray slowly, close enough to read the writing on the cover without lifting it. The letters were embossed in silver: Witness Protection and Return Agreement. Beneath that, in smaller text, Voluntary Statement of Non-Coercive Exposure. "That is a lot of words for a trap," he said. Elara's voice was flat. "They prefer traps with margins." Ethan opened the folder. The first page was written in English, which somehow made it feel more insulting. The terms were neat, generous, and devastating. Ethan Cole would affirm that Princess Elara Vare appeared distressed, unstable, and suggestible at the moment of exposure. He would state that he could not determine whether his entry had been guided by glamour, magical influence, or deliberate royal action. He would acknowledge that continued proximity to the princess had created emotional pressure affecting his judgment. In exchange, the Crimson Vale Court would ensure his safe return to human territory, pay all outstanding debts associated with his employment contract, provide lifetime financial compensation under strict confidentiality, erase sensitive supernatural details from public record, and protect him from any future night court reprisal. At the bottom, A final clause waited like the point of a knife wrapped in silk. The witness further agrees that the mourning mask should be restored temporarily for the heir's protection until the court determines whether her exposed mark presents danger to herself or the realm. Ethan read the page twice. The first time, fear moved through him. The second time, anger did. Not the hot, reckless kind that made people slam tables in movies. This was colder, familiar. The same anger he had felt years earlier in a Chicago conference room, when management handed him a statement that sounded reasonable until he noticed every sentence had been designed to make a frightened young woman look responsible for powerful men's choices. Elara watched him. "That document can save your life," she said. Ethan kept his eyes on the page. "It can save my body. That is not always the same thing. Do not make poetry out of survival." "I am not. I am doing the math." "Then do it correctly. You are human, mortal, unranked, alone in a court that can ruin you in ways your world does not have names for. They are offering money, protection, and a way out. They are offering me a script. They are offering you what most people would take." Ethan looked up. "Would you blame me if I did?" The question made something flicker behind her eyes. She answered too quickly. "No, that was fast. Because it is true." "Is it?" Elara turned away from the tray, but the law kept her close enough that turning away did not become escape. "I have watched nobles sell truths for far less. I have watched friends become quiet because silence bought them another year of comfort. I have watched my own mother accept half explanations because whole ones threatened the kingdom. I would not blame a man I met tonight for choosing to survive a nightmare he never asked to enter. That is generous. No, it is practical." Ethan studied her profile in the softened light. She looked impossibly controlled, but he had begun to notice the cost of that control. The small tension at the corner of her mouth, the way her shoulders never fully relaxed, the way she spoke of betrayal without raising her voice because raised voices had probably been used against her since childhood. "And what would happen to you if I signed?" he asked. "The court would use your statement to argue the record is unstable. And the mask? Restored. For how long?" Elara looked at him then, and the answer was in her silence. "Temporary. The most permanent word in the palace." Ethan closed the folder. No, the word was not loud, but the room seemed to hear it. The hearth burned higher. The covered mirrors remained still, but a faint pulse moved through their cloths, as if the palace had recorded the refusal even without being asked. Elara stared at him. "Do not answer quickly because you are angry." "I am not answering quickly. I have been deciding this since the moment I saw the phrase emotional pressure affecting his judgment." "Ethan." It was the first time she said his name without title, warning, or distance. That did more to him than he wanted it to. "Read the agreement carefully. Refusing it may leave you with no protection at dawn. Signing it leaves you with none. You do not owe me that." "I know." "Then why?" He looked down at the folder, at the perfect lines of legal language trying to make cowardice sound responsible. "Because I know exactly what it feels like when a room full of important people hands you a lie and calls it the reasonable choice. I signed one once." Alara's expression changed. "You said you told the truth." "Eventually." Ethan set the folder back on the tray and rubbed one hand across his face, suddenly more tired than he had felt all night. "Before the investigation, my supervisor gave me a draft statement. It said the maintenance logs were unclear. It said responsibility could not be assigned. It said Rachel had performed an independent check without authorization, which was technically true but framed to make her look careless. I did not write it. I did not believe it. But I took it home and stared at it for 6 hours because signing it would have kept my life intact." The fire cracked softly. "I almost did," he said. "That is the part nobody wants in the heroic version. I almost signed. I thought about rent, health insurance, my reputation, my future. I thought about how nobody would blame me because everyone understands survival when it is their own. Then I pictured Rachel reading my statement and realizing the one person who knew the truth had decided she was less important than his comfort." He shook his head. "I could not live with that version of myself. So I told the truth the next morning. It cost me more than I expected, but not as much as signing would have." Alara's eyes had gone very still. "You think this is the same?" "No. This is bigger, stranger, and much more likely to involve ancient mirror penalties. But the shape is the same." He tapped the folder once. "This says you were unstable. It says I was influenced. It says the mask protects you. It turns everything I saw into fog. I will not do that. The tray beneath the folder began to glow. The silver edges lit from within, and the bone pin rolled by itself toward Ethan's hand, stopping just short of his fingers. An invisible pressure entered the room, not command exactly, but invitation weighted by threat. A line of red text appeared across the folder cover. Witness response required. It is forcing a legal answer, Elara said. Can I refuse verbally? Yes, but every refusal carries consequence. What kind? The court may classify you as hostile to settlement. Of course it may. Ethan picked up the pen. Elara stepped forward sharply. Do not sign refusal without counsel. Do I have counsel? No. Then I am using common sense and spite. Those are not legal strategies. They are very American ones. This time, despite everything, Elara let out a breath that was almost a laugh. Ethan opened the folder to the signature page. There were 2 lines, one for acceptance, one for formal rejection. Beneath the rejection line, smaller words warned that refusal voided the protective return offer and preserved the witness for full adversarial dawn review. Ethan signed his name on the rejection line, not dramatically, not with a flourish. Just the same practical signature he had put on employment forms, repair invoices, apartment leases, and delivery receipts. Ethan Cole. Ordinary letters. Mortal hand. No magic. No blood. No title. The moment the pen left the page, every covered mirror in the room rang once. The folder burst into red light, then folded itself shut. Elara closed her eyes, and when she opened them, there was something in her face Ethan had not seen before. Not gratitude. That would have been too simple. It was recognition sharpened by disbelief. The look of someone watching an unlikely bridge hold weight. You understand they will punish you for that, she said. They can get in line. This is not a joke. I know. Then stop answering like you are not afraid. Ethan looked at her fully now. I am afraid. I have been afraid since the door opened. I am afraid of the court, the law, Adrian, that mask, the mirrors, and at least 3 kinds of vampire etiquette I have probably broken without noticing. Fear is not the problem. What is? Letting fear do my talking. Elara looked away, but not before he saw the impact of the words. The antechamber fell into another silence, and this one was different from the first. No longer the silence of 2 strangers trapped by law. This was the silence after a choice, when the room has to rearrange itself around something that cannot be unsaid. The wall panel opened again. The tray withdrew with the rejected agreement. Before the panel closed, a thin strip of paper slid free and fluttered to the floor. Ethan bent to pick it up, and the witness line flared until Elara moved with him, both of them crouching awkwardly near the hearth as if the ancient palace had decided even dropped paper required shared participation. Ethan unfolded it. This page was not in English. It was written in old court script, black letters bleeding slightly at the edges. Elara took one look and went cold. That is not from Adrian's office. What is it? She read silently, and as she did, the crown mark on her cheek dimmed until it was almost invisible. It is a draft petition prepared for dawn. About me? About me. Ethan waited. Alara's voice stayed level, but it cost her something. They intend to argue that my refusal to restore the mask proves the mark has corrupted my judgment. They will say my defense of you indicates emotional instability. If you refuse marriage review, they will claim I have been publicly rejected after exposure and therefore cannot command court confidence. If you accept, they will claim I manipulated a human into binding himself to me and therefore cannot command court confidence. Ethan stared at the page. They built both doors to the same room. Yes. And that room is you losing the throne. Yes. The word was quiet. Not defeated. Worse. Familiar. Ethan stood slowly, the paper in his hand. This was the real mechanism, clearer than gears inside the mask. Adrian did not need to win one argument. He had designed the court so every argument led back to Elara being unfit. Accept, refuse, speak, stay silent, mask, no mask, human witness, human husband, human rejection. Every path ended with someone else taking her voice and calling it governance. Ethan crossed to his tool bag and pulled out his tablet. The cracked screen still showed fragments of the palace system. He remembered the wiring behind the forbidden chamber wall, the strange buzz in the mirrors, the delayed warning, the way the mask's interior threads had moved before anyone commanded them. He was not a royal scholar. He was not a mage, but he knew systems. He knew when a circuit had been rerouted to produce a predetermined result while pretending to respond naturally. "Can the Dawn Review see technical records?" he asked. Elara frowned. "What kind?" "Maintenance logs, mirror activation sequences, door routing, artifact response timing. Those are palace infrastructure records. The court considers them beneath succession law." "That is convenient too." Her eyes sharpened. "What did you notice?" Ethan knelt beside the table and opened the diagnostic tools still stored on his tablet. "When the door appeared, my route changed before I touched anything. When I entered, the mirrors woke faster than they should have if this was accidental discovery. When the mask moved, it moved toward you before the court officially ordered restoration. That means 3 supposedly separate systems knew what to do before the law finished deciding what happened." Elara stared at him. "You think the event was staged?" "I think someone set the room up so any accident would become useful. Maybe not me specifically. Maybe any worker, servant, or outsider unlucky enough to hear you through that door." The word unlucky hung there. Ethan wished it were the right one. It was not. He remembered the whisper he had heard. "Please, not the mask again." "Or maybe," he said slowly, "someone knew I would open a door if I thought somebody needed help." Alara's face tightened. Adrian had access to contractor files. Background checks. Extensive ones. So he knew about Chicago. Likely. The room seemed to tilt. Ethan felt anger again, but this time it carried an edge of humiliation. His wound, his choice, the thing that had cost him a life and taught him what kind of man he wanted to be, might have been cataloged and used as bait. Elara saw the realization land. "Ethan," she said, softer than before. "I am sorry." He looked at her then, and the reversal of it struck him. The princess hidden for nearly 2 centuries was apologizing to the human whose worst habit had made him useful to her enemy. He let out a breath. "Do not apologize for the law," he said, echoing her earlier words. "Or for men who hide behind it." The tablet chirped. A file opened, not fully, but enough to show a timestamp from 30 minutes before Ethan had ever reached the North Wing. Route alteration authorized. Mirror pre-wake sequence initiated. Morning mask recovery protocol armed. The authorization name was redacted, but the crest beside it was not. A silver thorn vine. Adrian's crest. Ethan and Elara looked at the screen together. For the first time, the court's trap had a visible wire. Not proof enough to end the game, perhaps, but enough to begin one. Alara's hand hovered near the tablet, then stopped. "If we present this, Adrian will say a human technician fabricated it. Probably. The court will say infrastructure records are inadmissible without mirror confirmation. Then we get mirror confirmation. The mirrors are controlled by the palace." Ethan looked toward the covered glass. "No, they are connected to the palace. There is a difference." Elara studied him with new intensity. "You can make them. Show the logs." "I can try." "Trying and succeeding are not the same." "They rarely are. If you fail, the court will call it sabotage." "Then I should avoid failing." The answer was absurd, but his hands were already moving through diagnostic menus, checking signal paths, searching for the architecture beneath the magic. He did not understand blood law. He did not understand royal succession. He did not understand why a vampire princess with a crown burning under her skin was being treated like a risk to her own inheritance. But he understood concealed wiring. He understood delayed triggers. He understood systems designed to make a false outcome look inevitable. And for the first time since he entered the palace, his ordinary skill mattered. Not because it made him powerful, but because power had grown careless around things it considered beneath notice. Elara watched the tablet, then watched him. "You refused protection, found their draft petition, and now intend to challenge court evidence using maintenance records. When you put it that way, it sounds bad. It sounds impossible. I fix impossible lighting problems for people who schedule opening night before testing the rig. This is not my first terrible deadline." Dawn was still beyond the covered windows, but the palace had begun to pale at the edges, black stone taking on a faint red sheen. Bloodlight was coming. So was the court. So was Adrian with his perfect language and polished trap. Ethan felt fear move through him again, steady and real. Then he looked at Elara, at the mark she had been told to hide, at the face the court wanted to turn back into a legal problem, and he knew his worth in that room would not be decided by title, blood, money, or immortality. It would be decided by whether he could stand in front of power and refuse to help it lie. He plugged his tablet into the base of the nearest mirror. The glass shivered beneath its cloth. Elara stepped beside him, not because the law forced her this time, though it did, but because she chose to look at what he was doing. "What do you need from me?" she asked. Ethan smiled faintly without taking his eyes from the screen. "The truth." Elara's voice lowered. "That is dangerous here." "Good," he said. "Then maybe they will finally respect it." The mirror accepted Ethan's tablet for exactly 17 seconds before the palace turned against him. At first, the connection seemed almost ordinary. Lines of system text crawling across the cracked screen, timestamps arranging themselves in clean columns, redacted authorization trails flickering behind layers of old security. Ethan knelt beside the covered glass with Elara standing close enough for the witness line to remain calm, and for one impossible moment the night offered them something that felt like a path. Route alteration authorized before technician arrival. Mirror pre-wake sequence initiated before forbidden exposure. Morning mask recovery protocol armed before air distress call. 3 records. 3 small fractures in the story Adrian wanted the court to believe. Ethan's hands moved with practiced precision, not magical, not royal, just competent in the unglamorous way of people who fixed broken systems while powerful people argued above them. He copied the logs into a protected diagnostic cache, cross-linked the timestamps, and began searching for a mirror confirmation layer that could make the evidence admissible. "There," he said, more to himself than to Elara. The mirror woke before the law triggered. That should not happen unless somebody scheduled it. Elara leaned closer, the softened light catching the crown mark on her cheek. "Can you show that at dawn? If I can keep the connection open." The nearest mirror shivered under its cloth. The tablet screen flashed once. Then the room went black. Not dim, not shadowed. Black, as if every flame, lamp, and star painted on the ceiling had been swallowed in the same breath. Ethan heard Elara inhale, sharply beside him. The witness line on the floor flared red, then snapped into a thin circle around their feet. His tablet emitted a high warning tone. Unauthorized evidence extraction. Infrastructure breach. Witness reclassification pending. The covered mirrors tore themselves free. Cloths flew upward and vanished into ash-colored mist before touching the floor. One by one, the glass surfaces filled, with faces not curious this time, not divided into factions, but assembled in full court. Queen Marceline stood at the center of the succession hall beneath a sky of red dawnlight filtering through stained glass. Lord Adrian Vale stood below her, and in his hand was a mirrored tablet displaying Ethan's own diagnostic connection like an accusation carved in fire. "Your Majesty," Adrian said, voice ringing with restrained horror, so perfect it had to be practiced. "The human witness has attempted to tamper with palace memory." Ethan rose too fast, and the witness line screamed in light. Elara moved with him before the law could punish the distance. "That is false," she said. "He found records you did not want seen." Adrian turned toward the mirror that framed them. His eyes did not go to Elara first. They went to Ethan, and this time the courtesy was gone. Mr. Cole was granted protection under witness law, not permission to violate sovereign infrastructure. He connected foreign human equipment to a royal memory mirror during private review. He accessed succession records without authorization. He created a duplicate file. The law is clear. Ethan held up the tablet. "The records show the door, mirrors, and mass protocols were activated before I entered the sanctum. The records show whatever you wrote into them. I did not write timestamps that old." A convenient claim from a man whose entire profession involves altering light. The insult was soft, elegant, and devastating. Ethan felt the court react to it. Altering light. Suddenly his skill, the one ordinary thing that had made him useful, became suspicious. A lighting engineer could change what people saw. A technician could route signals. A human contractor could plant evidence, especially if guided by a princess desperate to avoid lawful masking. The trap closed with a sound no one else could hear. Elara stepped forward. He could not have known where to look unless the records existed, or unless your highness told him what fiction would serve you best. The crown mark on Elara's cheek flared crimson. "Careful." Adrian bowed. "Always." Queen Marceline raised one hand, and the hall fell quiet. Her face was unreadable, but Ethan saw the cost beneath it now. the terrible calculation of a ruler surrounded by law that might already be infected. "Mr. Cole," she said, "did you connect your device to the mirror?" Ethan could lie and say no. It would fail. The mirrors had watched him. "Yes." "Did my daughter instruct you to do so?" "No." "Did she provide access, code, blood phrase, ritual phrase, or court authorization?" "No." Adrian lifted his cane slightly. Then, by his own admission, the human acted alone. The pale-robed clerk from earlier stepped forward, book open, face grim. "Unauthorized witness interference during private review permits emergency containment. If the court finds active tampering, proximity protection may be suspended and the witness may be removed for independent examination." Removed. The word hit the antechamber harder than any threat. Ethan looked at the red line on the floor. Elara did too. For hours, the law had forced them together, an unwanted leash disguised as protection. Now the court had found a way to cut it exactly when remaining together mattered most. Alara's voice dropped into something dangerous. "You will not take him." Lady Voss appeared in one of the side mirrors, expression cold with triumph. "Your Highness's immediate defense further supports the contamination petition. My defense supports the fact that this court is punishing a witness for finding evidence." He found nothing admissible. Adrian's tone remained calm. He manufactured doubt. That is what humans do when truth disadvantages them. They make fog and sell it as fairness. Ethan's anger rose, but fear rose with it. Because the court was listening. Not all of them with hate. Some with doubt. Some with relief. It was easier for them to believe the human had tampered than to believe the palace had been used. Easier to blame the man with the tool bag than the noble with the silver thorn crest. Easier to call Elara unstable than admit they had helped keep her hidden. Queen Marceline closed her eyes for 1 second. When she opened them, the decision had already hurt her. Until the Dawn Review determines admissibility, Ethan Cole will be removed from the heir's presence and held under mirror examination. Elara turned toward her mother, shock breaking through royal control. "No." Marceline's jaw tightened. "The law allows no alternative once tampering is charged. Then the law is being used against itself." "I know." The words were so quiet only the mirrors made them public. For the first time, the queen sounded not powerful, but trapped at the very center of the machine she ruled. Adrian did not miss the opportunity. "Restore the mourning mask during separation," he said. The entire antechamber chilled. Elara went still in a way Ethan had learned to fear. "That was not ordered," Queen Marceline said. "It is required," Adrian replied. "Without the witness present, the heir's exposed mark presents further instability to court perception. The mask need only remain until dawn judgment. Temporary restraint, Your Majesty. Nothing more. Temporary." Ethan saw Alara's face change at the word. Not panic exactly. Worse. Recognition. The kind of recognition a person feels when an old door opens behind them and they already know the room inside. The floor split with red light. From a panel near the wall, the repaired half of the mourning mask rose on a silver stand, whole again, polished, patient, waiting. Ethan moved without thinking, but 2 guards entered through doors that had not been there a moment earlier and stepped between him and the stand. They did not strike him. They did not need to. The law circle tightened around his chest like invisible pressure, forcing him back. Alara's eyes found his across the shrinking space. "Do not fight them," she said. "Elara, do not give them another charge." It was the first time he heard fear in her voice for him instead of herself. That almost broke him more than the mask. The guards approached Ethan. The witness line flickered wildly, trying to preserve proximity while the court's new order overrode it. A sound like cracking ice filled the room. Ethan felt the law release him, and the sudden absence was horrible. For hours, the bond of distance had been a trap. Now losing it felt like falling. The guards took his tablet, his tool bag, even the small lamp he had adjusted. For her, the room's light sharpened immediately, harsher on Alara's face. The crown mark blazed under exposure. Adrian watched from the mirror, serene. "Mr. Cole," he said, "at dawn, you may still preserve yourself. Admit the princess directed your interference. Accept memory sealing. Or accept marriage review under court supervision. Refusal will leave you subject to full human liability under night law." Ethan looked at the queen. Marceline's face was stone, but her hands had closed around the arms of her throne. He looked at the court. hundreds of immortal faces waiting to see whether the ordinary man would finally become reasonable. Then he looked at Elara as the silver mask began to float toward her. She did not step back. She stood like a princess because they had trained her to look dignified while being cornered. Ethan hated them for that more than anything. "I found your wire," he said to Adrian. The court stilled. Adrian's expression did not change. "You found a fantasy." "No. I found your crest in a place it was not supposed to be. And if you are this scared of a repairman with a cracked tablet, then the truth must be worse than I thought." Adrian smiled faintly. "Take him." The guards guided Ethan toward the open door. He did not resist. Elara's voice followed him, low and fierce. "Ethan." He turned as far as the guards allowed. The mask hovered inches from her face, its silver surface reflecting the crown mark it had been built to hide. "I will not say you told me to lie," he said. "No matter what they offer." For one heartbeat, her royal composure vanished. Not completely, just enough for him to see the woman under the title, frightened and furious and alone again in a room full of people calling the cage protection. Then the doors closed between them. The last thing Ethan saw was the mask moving toward Elara's face and the softened lamp being carried away from the table, leaving her in the cruel white glare the court preferred. The corridor outside swallowed him in red dawnlight. Behind him, the antechamber sealed. Ahead, the guards led him toward mirror examination, toward questions designed to make truth sound like sabotage, toward a court that had already decided an ordinary human was most useful when broken into testimony. For the first time since he opened the forbidden door, Ethan was no longer within 10 steps of Princess Elara, and the palace, relieved of the law that had forced them to see each other, began putting the old darkness back where it belonged. The mirror examination chamber was built to make truth feel guilty. Ethan stood alone in the center of a circular room beneath the palace, surrounded by tall panes of black glass that showed him from angles no human eye should have found. His tool bag was gone. His tablet was gone. Even his work jacket had been taken, leaving him in a plain gray shirt under lights, so white they made every tired line in his face look like evidence. Across the glass, voices asked him the same questions in different shapes. Did Princess Elara instruct him to access the mirror logs? Did she influence him emotionally? Did she promise protection, title, wealth, or marriage? Did he alter the records? Did he understand that false testimony before night law could erase every treaty protection his species had negotiated? Ethan answered until his throat felt dry. No, 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 no. Yes, he understood. Then again. No, 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 no. Yes, he understood. The mirrors did not shout. They did not threaten. They simply repeated, patient as stone, trying to wear his truth down into something easier to file. Above him, far beyond the chamber's ceiling, the dawn review had begun. He could hear it through the mirror system, not clearly, but in fragments. Adrian's voice, smooth and solemn. Queen Marceline's silence. The murmur of nobles. The phrase emergency marriage review appearing again and again like a door the court wanted everyone to walk through. Then another sound entered the system, thin at first, almost hidden beneath the legal recitation. Metal tightening. Glass ringing. A woman trying to speak through something designed to take her voice. Ethan lifted his head. "Elara," he said. The mirrors around him went blank. In the succession hall, Princess Elara stood before the full crimson veil court with the mourning mask locked against her face. It had restored itself into flawless silver, covering the crown mark beneath a surface polished bright enough to reflect every noble who preferred her hidden. She stood on the central dais below her mother's throne, shoulders straight, hands still, dignity intact by sheer force of will. Adrian stood beside her, not touching, never crude enough to touch, presenting restraint as mercy. "The heir's mark has destabilized public confidence," he announced. "The human witness has contaminated the record, refused settlement, and attempted unauthorized extraction of royal infrastructure data. The court must now preserve continuity. I therefore petition for supervised marriage review, restoration of regency authority, and immediate sealing of the witness's memory following ceremonial confirmation." The hall stirred in approval, fear, and relief. The trap had become respectable again. Then Elara raised one hand. The hall quieted, more out of habit than respect. Adrian turned slightly. "Your Highness, the mask will make speech difficult." Please conserve your strength. She looked at him through the silver eye slits, and even hidden, she made the room colder. Her hand moved to the side of the mask. The court realized what she intended a moment too late. Do not, Adrian said, the first true command slipping through his polished voice. Elara pulled. The mask resisted. Silver lines flared against her skin. The hall filled with the piercing sound of an old law refusing to die. Queen Marceline rose from her throne. Ethan, far below, saw it all reflected suddenly in the mirrors around him as the palace itself opened the examination chamber to the review. Elara pulled again, not with brute strength, but with the terrible calm of someone done asking permission to exist. The mask cracked. Adrian stepped forward. Restrain the heir. No one moved. Not the guards. Not the clerks. Not even Lady Voss. Because Queen Marceline had lifted one hand, and in that hand was the broken half of Ethan's voltage clamp, retrieved from the forbidden chamber. The queen's voice filled every mirror in the palace. Let my daughter speak. Elara tore the mourning mask from her face. It fell onto the marble and shattered so completely that no piece remained large enough to cover even a child's eye. The crimson crown mark on her cheek burst into light, not wild, not unstable, but clear and sovereign, a red-gold flame shaped like a diadem beneath her skin. Every mirror in the hall bowed inward. The ancient voice thundered through the palace. True heir revealed. False restraint identified. The court froze. Adrian went pale. Elara turned, not to the throne, not to the nobles, but to the mirror showing Ethan in the examination chamber. For the first time, the entire court saw her look at the human not as contamination, not as scandal, not as a legal problem, but as the one person who had refused to make her smaller to save himself. Bring Ethan Cole before me, she said. This time, her voice did not shake. Not as a prisoner, not as evidence, as my witness. The doors of Ethan's chamber opened. No guard touched him now. The mirrors lit a path of red dawnlight through the palace, and Ethan followed it upward, exhausted, unarmed, and very aware that hundreds of immortal nobles were watching an ordinary human worker walk into the center of their oldest power. When he entered the succession hall, the silence was absolute. Elara waited on the dais, unmasked, radiant, and terrifying in the way truth is terrifying when it has survived every attempt to bury it. Adrian's voice cut across the hall one last time. Your Highness, choose carefully. If you stand with him, the court will demand marriage to contain the scandal. Elara looked at the nobles, then at her mother, then finally at Ethan. No, she said. The court demanded marriage because it feared a human saw what it tried to hide. Let it hear my answer clearly. I will not be married to contain a scandal. I will not be masked to comfort cowards. I will not let this man be erased because he told the truth. She stepped down from the dais and stood beside Ethan in full view of every mirror. Ethan Cole is my first witness by law. He is under my protection by choice. Any court that calls him unworthy must first explain why a man with no bloodline, no title, and no reason to defend me showed more honor tonight than the nobles sworn to my crown. The shock that moved through the hall was almost visible. Nobles lowered their eyes. Servants stared openly. Queen Marceline's face broke, just for a moment, into grief and pride. The ancient mirrors flared red. Witness recognized. Heir's choice recorded. Elara offered Ethan her hand, palm upward, not claiming, not commanding, simply asking before the whole world that had tried to decide for her. Ethan looked at that hand, then at the court waiting to see whether the human would reach above his station. He placed his hand in hers. The palace bells rang once, clean and bright, and every vampire in the hall understood that the lowest man in the room had just been chosen publicly by the woman they had tried to hide. By the time the last palace bell faded, the Crimson Veil court had changed shape without moving from the hall. The same nobles stood beneath the same vaulted ceiling, dressed in the same velvet, silver, and old pride, but the room no longer belonged entirely to them. It belonged to the mirrors now, and to the record they could not edit, and to the unmasked princess standing beside a human technician whose hand she had chosen in front of them all. Lord Adrian Vale was not dragged away or destroyed in some grand spectacle. That would have been too simple for a court built on language. Queen Marceline stripped him of regency authority with one sentence spoken before every mirror. then ordered the silver thorn records opened for full review. His followers lowered their eyes one by one, not out of shame perhaps, but because even vampires knew when a shadow had lost the wall that protected it. The mourning mask was gathered from the marble in broken pieces and placed in a crystal case at the foot of the throne, not as a relic of honor, but as evidence of an age that had mistaken silence for stability. Then Elara turned to the court and rewrote the first law of her reign before the crown ever touched her head. No heir of Crimson Veil would be hidden for the comfort of those afraid to look. No mask would be placed on royal blood without consent freely spoken before open mirrors. No witness, human or otherwise, would be erased for telling an inconvenient truth. The old houses listened in stunned quiet as the palace accepted each word, the mirrors glowing red in confirmation, the ancient architecture bending around a future it had resisted for centuries. Queen Marceline descended from the throne slowly and stopped before her daughter. For a moment, neither of them looked like myth. They looked like a mother and child standing on opposite sides of years they could not reclaim. Then the queen bowed her head, not to the heir, to the woman she had failed to see clearly. "I believed I was protecting you," Marceline said. Elara's voice was soft, but it carried. "I know." The queen's eyes glistened like winter stars. "That does not make it right." "No," Elara said, "but it means we can begin somewhere true." That was the closest thing to forgiveness the court had ever heard in public, and it frightened them more than anger. Ethan stood a few steps away, trying very hard not to look as overwhelmed as he felt. He expected someone to return his tool bag, escort him to the service gate, and hand him a legal document explaining why he should never mention any of this to anyone with a pulse. Instead, Queen Marceline turned toward him. "Ethan Cole," she said, and the hall went still again. "Crimson Veil owes you a debt of witness. You opened a door you were not meant to find. You saw a truth we were not prepared to face. You were offered safety in exchange for betrayal and refused it. This court will remember that." Ethan did not know how to answer a vampire queen in front of several hundred immortals, so he chose honesty, the only language that had survived the night. "Your Majesty, I just did what I could live with." Marceline studied him for a long moment. "That is rarer than you think." The title they gave him was not husband, not prince, not noble. Elara made certain of that. The court demanded marriage because it wanted a cage with flowers on it, and she broke that demand before it could become tradition. Instead, by public decree and mirror record, Ethan Cole became royal lightkeeper of Crimson Veil Palace, guardian of the mirror pathways, keeper of visible records, and protected witness of the sovereign heir. It was a strange title, half practical and half legendary, but it came with a room in the East Tower, a salary large enough to make him sit down when he saw the number, and a clause stating no member of the court could compel his testimony, alter his memory, or move him beyond palace protection without Elara's consent and his own. The last part mattered most. His own. Weeks passed. Dawn came and went many times over the Atlantic cliff, washing the black towers in pale gold. Human contractors returned to the palace with clearer maps, better warnings, and doors that no longer moved without record. The human staff stopped lowering their eyes quite so quickly. In the great hall, nobles still whispered, because courts do not become gentle overnight. But they whispered more carefully when Ethan crossed the marble with a tablet under one arm and a tool bag in his hand. Some looked at him with resentment, some with curiosity, a few, eventually, with respect. Elara no longer wore the mask. At first, the court looked at the crown mark on her cheek, as if staring could turn it back into scandal. Then they learned to bow to it. On the night of her coronation, the palace mirrors shone clear instead of black. Elara stood before them unhidden, crowned in red light, no silver between her face and the world. When the ceremony ended, she found Ethan on the balcony where the ocean wind rolled cold over the cliffs. "You are free to leave," she said, just as she had promised she would say if they survived. Ethan looked out at the waves, then back at the palace that had nearly destroyed them and somehow become the first place in years where his truth had built something instead of costing him everything. "I know," he said. Elara watched him carefully, and he turned toward her, ordinary, mortal, still tired around the eyes, still a man who fixed lights because darkness bothered him. "And I would like to stay, if I am wanted." The question in her face was older than pride and softer than fear. Ethan answered it before she could ask. Not because of the law, not because of the court, because of you. Elara reached for his hand in the open air, where no mirror demanded it and no noble could turn it into procedure. This time, when he took it, no bell rang, no ancient voice spoke, and no law drew a circle around their feet. The silence belonged only to them. Behind them, Crimson Vale Palace glowed with 1,000 repaired lights, each one steady against the dark.